Basically, Sam Matthews did a Anakin Padme meme, Monty, where he was like, you know what, guys, I've heard your complaints and there will be drastic changes in the offseason. Then Padme is like, you mean to Razork, Humanoid, and Hillesang, right? The bad players, right? Right? And then he's just like, right, this episode of Summoning Insight is coming to you through, initially, if you're watching live, Twitch, in which case, roll over the little prime. You know the drill by now. Luckily, that's actually the good thing, Monty, is that all these like pleb streamers have at least conditioned people that they will be begging and you must give them money to live or something. So see, actually, we're drifting behind them NASCAR style on that one. We don't have to do all the work, do we? Even, you know.
See, I've actually taken a new approach on my Bangers Only stream, which is not to beg, but to shame them for holding on to their own money, right, and act very disappointed that they are not giving me the free Jeff Bezos money as opposed to somebody else. But that applies here too. That applies.
Yes. Obviously, if you're watching the VOD, like the video, leave a comment for the algorithm. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, subscribe. It has all of the great shows on. Power Spike, Monty and Wolf show, Best Damn League show will be tomorrow. So if you're watching the VOD of Summoning Insight, it'll be the day after. That's when you'll see the VOD there. All the great stuff. And of course, we have a sponsor, Monty.
That's right. I know All For Me Grog has been our theme song for almost 10 years, but not everybody likes Grog. Some people like different things instead. And so you can see what I'm holding here. This is the glycerin chamber from the Freeze Pipe Bong XL, and 420 is coming up. So what you do is you just take this separate piece and you pop it into the freezer for an hour. And glycerin is, of course, a food safe ingredient, so no worries there. It gets super, super cold to the point that it will chill smoke by over 300 degrees, meaning that you're not going to scorch your throat, won't leave you parched. It's a much smoother, more enjoyable smoking experience with this glycerin chamber. So you can go ahead and head on over to www.thefreezepipe.com to get your cold hits and use our promo code LFN. That's LFN for Last Free Nation. And that will give you a 10% discount on your whole order. And they've got everything, not just bongs. They've got dab rigs, bubblers, just regular pipes, anything you could possibly want to enhance your 420 experience. So if you don't like grog, or perhaps you enjoy grog and cannabis together, or just separately, anything you want, this is the time. Head on over to thefreezepipe.com. And thank you.
What I've realized is sad. I'm actually mildly sad that I did give in years and years ago now, like probably like 4 years ago now, Monty, and do an actual like one of those dabs on stream. Because since me and Richard used to be the sort of people who were like against that, like fundamentally and almost on like an existential level, it would be so cool if like the first time I ever did an actual dab, it was just the cannabis dab. It's like an insanely powerful. That would be, and then did a dab. There we go. I could combine it all, the better dab. Exactly.
There you go. There you go.
I wish I could do that now. Sadly, I sold out my integrity and did a dab on, I think, like an ESL broadcast a few years ago.
I remember that, actually.
It's because we were just doing it, I think, because like Machine or someone was doing that thing with their like gatekeep. Here's the thing, quick side table on this one, Monty. What's the deal with that thing where people who themselves aren't even vaguely young compared to the Zoomers who play the game try to gatekeep that they're the ones that are just on the edge of the club of being like young and we're the boomers? You know when like Dom will try to do it to me? It never works, by the way, guys, if you ever watched, where he'll try to imply like I'm super old. It's like, bro, you are aware to the Zoomer, once you're over 25, you may as well be 70, mate. Like we're both just older there. They're like me when I was a little kid and I didn't know that like my granddad isn't actually that old. Like he just has mildly grey hair. Like you'll know when he's really old, mate. That's when he's all decrepit and can't walk. Like when he had just grey hair, actually that's like, you know, he's only coming out of middle age at that point in time. So what's the deal with that? Because it was Machine who himself, if people don't know, he's in his 30s almost certainly. Like he's not super young. He's not 22. I would guess he's 30 or 32 or something himself. He used to be the one who was always like, nah, when you guys do the dab though, it's so sort of like, you know, it's sort of like, what's that? It's like, come on, bro, you're basically now we're camping that one.
Yeah, exactly. You're old as fuck. I wonder who's giving Machine shit now for being old and uncool. It's true though. The boomer line is like 25, and it's a hard line between boomer and not boomer. Yep. And you're either on one side or the other, and there's no going back. But now I'm just happy to be a boomer. That's right. I'm loving it. I'm loving it.
And to be fair, as much as everyone thinks, because it's all about the idea of being cool and being the in-group, as much as everyone's like, oh, I'd want to be the Zoomer, so you wouldn't know. The Zoomers were the people who were like, well, Danny himself said that's not the case, so Will you be apologizing now? You know what I mean? That's the people in the Zoom account, boys. Like, you might think boomers are antiquated, but at least we could do things like go, maybe he's lying. I'll take that into consideration. No, you guys just take it at face value. That's why there's that meme that I did the joke of the other day, because everyone is like that. There's a famous concept that someone came up with. It's a bit like, Monty, a real life version of that famous opening scene of Blade Runner. You know, the one where they're doing the replicant test on that guy, and they show that one of the tests you can do is you ask them, like, you know, if you were a tortoise and you're upside down. Essentially, it's to like sort of circuit them because they can't think sort of like a human would, and it just messes with them, right? So essentially, there's a real life version of that supposedly it sort of can filter out if you're like very low IQ. Because basically, you ask the person this hypothetical question, what you say to them something like, "How would you feel if you hadn't had breakfast this morning?" Now, a moron, and by the way, spoiler, if you followed Richard Lewis's work, this is what all the tweets to him are like. The moron will go, "But I did have breakfast this morning." And you go, no, but imagine if you didn't. And they go, "But I did." Like, that's what Zoomers are like, mate. So I don't know why you're flexing. Like, if I were you, here's what we need. Here's the final comment here. We'll look back in and talk about some esports and League of Legends. The final comment is this. I want to spark a renaissance against Zoomerism, Monty, where I want people to call themselves neo-boomers, and that's going to be the group. If you're over 21, but you're not a fuckboy idiot like I'm describing, who knows whether he hypothetically could have not had breakfast or not, if you're capable of understanding that, don't align with the Zoomers. Come more to our side, call yourself a neo-boomer. You will be like the vanguard against the Zoomers with our philosophy, and we will raise you up to the heights. There you go. How about that?
Or you could call it post-Zoomerism to make it seem like it's the next step. There you go. There you go.
Yeah, that's true. Make it like it's actually the movement coming afterwards. Yeah, true. We've got past it.
Post-Zoomerism. Yeah, that's we should talk, I think, first about LEC a little bit, just because I want to get your take on the latest hilarious iteration of Fnatic.
Oh, we'll get into that. But here's the thing, Monty. As usual, I have come with some gifts, which is, if people don't know, I've been updating you all on it. The gift that never stops giving is Jankos's Twitter account with stories of people from Asia. We had it back in the day. Shout out back in the day to Prolly and Jankos when they used to bring us the Ryu stories. Now we're getting all the straight fire Evie stories. I mean, I showed you the Ruby one where he did actually use that black electrician's tape to just cover his entire window that had a blind quite clearly at the top of it. That's the Ruby one. But Evie is better, because the best thing about the Evie guy is he seems to actually have quite an outgoing personality, but he also has a limited vocabulary. So it just means accidentally he's saying all hilarious BM shit. So there was a couple I've got for you here, Monty, that I brought to the table, right? So there was one where it's a conversation Jankos posted, and it goes like this. It goes, Evie, so that's like him speaking, obviously. Evie goes, "How do you feel now?" Jankos says, "Worse than before." Evie says, "Nice." And now look, it turns out later on he actually did mean to say something else, like again, like sad or something, you know, but he just mistook it. So my follow-up, I thought was a banger, was I just said he has a bright future as an exec at Evil Geniuses, because think of the premise is like, how do you feel? Worse than before. Nice. And then my joke was, obviously it'd be called Evie Geniuses, wouldn't it? So
that's good.
There you go. And then there's another one. Don't worry, there's another Jankos Evie interaction. So here it is. It goes like this. Jankos says, "Evie, I need medicine. Do you have any?" Evie says, "For brain." Now, what's great is apparently Evie genuinely he meant, "Do you have a headache?" But again, because he's used slightly the wrong words, it just sounds like the most unintentionally BM thing you could say. Like, "I need some medicine, Evie, for your brain." Well, fucking hell, all right, I'll ask someone else then. You know what I mean? Like, you're bad alive. And then the best thing is, like I say, he actually did himself follow up and just say, I think, let's see, he did just say, "I'm sorry, I wanted to say for headache." So I'm telling you guys, one, I have to get this on record because everyone will forget it. But two, this is the gift that keeps giving. Follow Jankos' Twitter account, because these are straight fire. Like, I think they're funny as fuck, mate. I love it. I love like, because in the sense it's just wholesome, isn't it? Like, even though it's actually sort of like he's being burned, it's unintentional, isn't it? So it makes it funnier. And also, if you're Jankos, you catch that many strays and that amount of flack banter anyway. It's like now you're even getting it through like babblefish, like language barrier. Like, you're just getting burned left, right, and center all over the place.
Also, I mean, the way that Heretics are playing the game, he's trolling.
Oh,
he's trolling
he's on his own,
in the game too.
Yeah, he's on his own, mate. He's on his own.
I do love Evie, but I think it's pretty clear that like the language barriers that have been created on this team are causing enormous problems, because I don't think that Evie is bad in a vacuum because he's able to get these leads. I just think that it's very difficult to convert them, especially when they're playing split push compositions and we see Evie on a Tryndamere splitting on his own, and they had a lead and they arguably should have won the game that they played against Koi, but he overextends, then they die, then they start throwing the game. And so for me, if you're playing the problem with Evie is this. He plays very specific champions and he plays them well. I mean, he was known for his Urgot and, playing these all-ins and getting leads and then having the team kind of play through him when he had the leads when he was in Japan. But with a language barrier, it's very hard to communicate the game state that you need and the support that you need in order to continue to press an advantage with a split pusher that has to be precise, because you're playing around basically an ultimate timing window on Tryndamere, which is short. So if you fuck up that window, then you just die and then you lose pressure and then the other team can get back into the game. And that's kind of what happened in the Koi game. So I do wonder, especially with Evie and Ruvy's underperformance, if just the language barrier is just a massive factor on this team.
Oh, mate, let's be real. I'll give it up to Jack Spectre. He has the odd game where he pops off, but aside from that, Jankos is elo held, mate. He's just so much better than his teammates, and the worst thing is, it's just such an inappropriate team for him to be like a star figure on, because his best style isn't carry jungle anymore. Like if he was like Bo, maybe he could do something on this team. The problem is, like, you look at Jankos and you're like, bro, you could do everything right, but look at your solos. Like, as you say, dude, they can even get a lead. They can even be on their champions, but you can't rely on Team Heretics to close a game out. Like, there's just very few teams, like, they almost have to be against someone who's so weak-willed they just get over the finish line. Like, this is a team where that's unfortunately, I always go the other way on that one, Monty. If you're always generating leads but then you never close the game out, that's actually almost the worst team for me. Like, it's one thing if
like
you never
BDS from last year.
if you can just never get ahead at all, then yeah, I understand why you're losing the games. But if you're just throwing every game, if you're just throwing half your games, like, that just sounds pretty bad. Like, that's not a positive. Like, you're in the driver's seat over and over again.
I mean, it was kind of fascinating because this iteration of Koi, granted the sample size is small, but it feels like Koi can't get an early game advantage to save their life and is just constantly playing from behind. And this version of Heretics, they can't close the game even if they do have that advantage. So it led to a very weird matchup between the two of them.
They basically need to, like, form the StarCraft Brood War Archon. If they formed together, Monty, then they would have the best early game. They'd be good late with the late game, and then they'd just be the best team completely. So that's all we need.
Honestly, if you swapped Jankos and Malrong between
that would be a pretty
these
spicy
teams,
roster, wouldn't it?
Because I think the problem with Koi right now is that, not only are they struggling to integrate Shigenda, but Malrong is so useless on a team that doesn't do well early. Remember when Malrong came into the Rogue roster, that was when we had the renaissance of their style where they were getting these massive leads in the early game. The thing about Malrong is, because of the way he plays League of Legends, if you are not getting those early leads, he's just completely fucking useless. Like, his only job in terms of his style is to sacrifice himself to prop up his lanes. That is just what he does. And he wastes his own time in order to do that. He tries extremely hard through weird pathing to do that. And so if you're falling behind
and all that shit,
if you fall behind, he's in real trouble, and he's not a super valuable asset to your team. So if you swapped Jankos and Malrong and you put Malrong on Heretics, where he might be able to get these, Evie even more ahead potentially. I mean, getting Jack Spectre ahead, not sure that really helps you a whole lot. And you put Jankos on Koi, where maybe he could at least stabilize the early game and prevent some of the early game deficiencies, and at least, I think, cover some lanes a little bit better or farm up himself. That all of a sudden, I think, becomes a better stylistic match for these teams.
Because to me, the G2 game is one of the reasons why you just can't have any hope in Heretics. Like, dude, look at some of the champions they have in their draft. Like, these would be amazing picks in a top Asian team, mate, but they just can't do anything with them. Like, that was just whack. Like, they had no chance to win this game.
Yeah. I mean, I think Shigenda, I'm not convinced that this is actually going anywhere. I think their one win was more of a throw from Heretics than Koi doing super well. And I think the deficits that they're kind of racking up in these early games make it very challenging for them to pull off victories.
The thing I'd be concerned about if you're a fan of Koi is this. Koi is actually one of the few bot lanes in LEC that essentially has it all. Like, they have the Lucian army, they have all the fucking Caitlyn and Locks or whatever. Like, dude, they have all the combos. Like, that should mean you should be one of the absolute best teams of the LEC. You should be dominant right now. Like, those are two good players in the bot lane, and it's a really powerful meta read you have there. But the problem is, the jungle and top just aren't reliable. Aren't reliable. So yeah, you're never going to get a lead early game, are you? Like, probably the most reliable way at the moment to get a kill is like just top lane early gank, right? Like, it happens every game almost.
Yeah, I think yeah, it's just this iteration of Koi is really struggling. They certainly don't have the same level of early game playmaking that they used to have. And it doesn't really make sense either, because you would assume that in this meta that has a lot of catch-up experience as it stands right now, where counter jungling is less fruitful than it used to be, it is a gank forward meta, because they this season they implemented mechanics into the jungle, such as the treat system, in order to make sure that you could gank early and not fall too far behind, because I think they were sick of the more farming style that we saw last year. And you would think that this would be a great meta for Malrang, because he could spend more time doing Malrang things on the map, waiting in brushes in lane, and still not be as far behind. But that's just not true. And perhaps Malrang's advantage last year was that when every other jungler was farming, that Malrang was the one who was heavily ganking, and that meant that he was kind of alone in doing that, and therefore it was more surprising, and his team would get kill advantages early while the other jungler was farming, and that's how it would balance out. Perhaps being in a more farming oriented jungle meta will be good for him upon that return, but at first blush you would think, oh, this ganking meta should be great for Malrang.
I also think as well, the other team they had was almost set up by default to allow him to be super aggro early and to do whatever he wanted. Essentially, also, even though he could be super active, he didn't actually have to be though, Monty. That's the thing. Think about it. You had Odoamne, who's like the permanent weak side king. Larson just lanes well every time anyway. And then you had one of the better bot lanes. Like, the best thing was to me in the last lineup without the Shigenda issue, essentially it was up to Malrang, like, where do you apply this pressure? What do you want to do? Who do you want to get ahead? But he also had all these options to work with. He was in a great position. I actually thought the team sort of like it balanced, the extremes balanced each other out. The problem with the Shigenda anglers, it's just taken another lane where now it's just like a weak lane. It's almost a waste of time to sort of feed it too much. But at the same time, like, then it becomes telegraphed that you're going to hit like the bot lane. It's like, I feel like it took a lot of the options away from them. It's not even just that Shigenda's bad. It's just like what he's changed in the team dynamic,
Yeah, and I think Shigenda did do better in terms of his carry role this past weekend. They switched him off carry pretty early on into the winter group stage because they were concerned about making that top 8. And going 1 and 2 obviously isn't great, but I think it did at least look better now. It did look better this weekend than it did previously. So perhaps it'll just be a slow roll over the week into integrating him into a better style. But I think it's tough to imagine that Malrang is going to. I think Malrang is now one of the major issues of this team, and that is disappointing to me because I'm a person who really loves watching Malrang play. I perhaps am weird in that because a lot of analysts don't like him, but I think he is very entertaining, and so I would like to see more of his play, and I want to see him integrated well into a team, and that's just not happening right now. And I think he is in fact like one of the major issues.
What you'd think with like how many times you see like Jarvan come back in the draft again? Like this guy, he used to go to that champion, even when it wasn't even the best champion in the meta, just because it fits his style perfectly. Like that's what I'm concerned about. Is like it's like you said before. The joke is at this point we're having to almost like copium infused speculate that like, well, maybe if the total opposite meta to Malrang's style comes back, Monty, like a farming meta, then that would make him more rare, and as a result, as a counter, he would work. It's like, bro, like
I mean, that is what happened last year.
And it's true, but we're just reaching so hard for it to work.
But that's what I'm saying. Like, it's weird, but maybe that is his strength. Like, it seems counterintuitive, but perhaps that is his strength. strength because that is when he was
Yes.
strong last year, as opposed to now when we see a lot more early ganks comparatively because of the way the jungle goes, that he isn't the unicorn of the jungle anymore who's making these emphases, right?
Yes.
I don't
By the
know.
way, let's do it then. Let's segue to the laugh. Like, oh, if this was HLTV.org in Counter-Strike, this would be titled, Come Here, Fnatic Fans, Fnatic Laughed Thread. That's like the way they would write it if people know the stupid terminology of that scene. Because the idea is we're just essentially going to laugh and poke fun at Fnatic now because
we're going to put Fnatic in the
they're all
stocks
world bad.
and throw Rotten Tomatoes at them in the square, which, by the way, is apparently what Sam Matthews wants. He's like pillaring himself, which I think is a very interesting choice on Twitter. He is just asking you to throw the tomatoes at him.
The problem with this is, right, one, obviously they're coming off the only split ever where they didn't make playoffs. And that even has their asterisk, which is this was the split where only 2 teams don't make playoffs. Like, that needs to be mentioned, guys. Because actually, by the way, what made their old record incredible is the fact that it was top 6. Like, dude, I actually think there's one thing I'll say before we burn Fnatic. By the way, you say whatever you like about, but they had this player and then this player. No. At the end of the day, to have that run of how many years that was and always make playoffs, that is unbelievable. Like, insanely props. Like, A+, fucking A star, S tier organization. Like, you get everything for that. Yeah, of course. Like, that is unbelievable. It's a bit like, if people don't know, T1 is like that. It's only something like one split ever. T1 just like had a shit run. Like, I think had one split they missed the playoffs like ever. So even if they then came 5th in a split, guys, who gives a shit? Like, for a normal org, making 5th is all right. Like, that's their worst day. So props to the old Fnatic. The problem is they've come off the worst split ever. And if you saw these opening games, I think it's going to be even worse than last split, mate. This looks really bad. Like, the players they've even brought in look mad lackluster. Like, this looks rubbish. This really looks bad. Like, I did the stat on Twitter just to fuck with obviously the fans of Reckless, because what I pointed out is this, Monty. So obviously Upset's only played 3 games, hasn't he? And he's won all 3. Reckless has won 2 games out of 12. He hasn't got to 3 wins yet. And Upset's only played 3 games. There you go. Game over. One more. That starts a banger, innit? So anyway, on the Fnatic angle, though, the real problem with this team is this, Monty. Right? I actually think I'm more upset about the mismanagement of this part of the roster than I am about the one that started the split. Like, when the one that started the split, remember, we all have to go back to the beginning and put the context in, to be fair. Nobody, I'll tell you right now, was hating on that Rocks guy. Nobody. Every fucking person on every broadcast and forum did that thing you all do at Worlds, like with the Bean guy 2 years ago, where you go, wow, this sub should be in LEC. I think they should sign him for real. Well, you know what they did? They took your advice. And by the way, my advice as well. I'm a fucking clueless pleb too. And they signed this guy and they put him in. And what do you know? He was one of the most limited champion capped players we've had in years in a top team and quickly got booted out correctly. That's okay. Like, I'm fine with that move, by the way, bringing in Advi in. He did deserve a chance. It's this Oscar in for Wonder One. I think that is death. One, the number one thing you had to fix in Fnatic in the off-season was the Razork humanoid thing. You not only didn't fix it, you've doubled down twice with that line. That is terrible. And then the one thing I actually thought in spring they had, Monty, was Wonder at least. And they've let him go. Now, look, it's implied he wanted to go. Like, he wants out of this shit show like Upset did. But even so, you have to think of the bigger picture. If you're Fnatic, I thought the best, and everyone else missed this, the best example of how badly Fnatic have managed the last 4 to 5 months, Monty, was that interview on the LEC broadcast where Yamato Cannon interviewed his boys, Hillasang and Upset, who were going to play in the Mad Lions Fnatic match. Great interview. The whole time I was just thinking, bro, all 3 of these people could be in Fnatic right now. They chose, essentially, by their own actions, they fired Yamato. Look, I get why they fired Hillasang, but everyone knew there was a chance for a bounce back. And then you let Upset just essentially sit and then leave. And now, by the way, might go and win the league without you. Like, that alone just shows, like, guys, how can we have these 3? And then what do we end up with? Like, we fired the coaches. We've got like Freeze's brother, okay, not a bad coach, but the idea is going to the Fnatic job's mental. And then we've got Oscar in, who's nobody, and by the way, looked pretty bad in those first games.
Oh, terrible.
And then, like I say, I can give you the Advia one. That one's fine. But like, what have we ended up with? Because in this team, let's be real, the stars of the team on paper are going to again have to be Humanoid and Reckless. And by the way, in their own ways, because it's totally the opposite idiosyncrasies, they are some of the worst players at their role. Like, Humanoid is still an idiot. Like, I've gone from being like he plays badly to I actually think he's an idiot, mate. Because here's the problem, Monty. If you make a choice Everyone can make a bad choice. Everyone can get unlucky. He's actively choosing these decisions, bro. And if you see that hold, I told you, that swagger doesn't ever work for me. It's only cool to be like, I'm a rock and roll guy who doesn't really give a fuck. If you then win. If you then lose, you're just an arsehole not trying. Like, you're actually just an objectively bad teammate at that point in time, mate. Why would I have any morale when I'm playing in a team and I know you don't really care and you think it's hilarious that you're inting? And then the reckless angle, like, it's just worse even the last split. Like, he just looks really toothless. The joke now is, everyone was flaming him last split for picking Zaya when it was obviously like he was just doing it like, oh, he just wanted to be protected. Everyone else is carrying on Zaya, you dumb motherfucker. Now it's like back in the meta and they're all carrying on it. And oh yeah, let's just put this in there. But your org gave away the greatest Rakan player of all time. Oh, the whole thing's so bad, mate. So come on, hit me with some of your angles. Where you at on this Fnatic one? There's so many angles to this.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it just feels doomed. And the reason why I think it feels doomed, to touch on your point earlier, is that they never actually got Humanoid and Razork to work together. And as soon as, I mean, it's possible that Elyoya would have been on Fnatic. I'm sure Fnatic was.
It was Fnatic or G2 apparently was the ones he was going to, yeah.
Yeah, they were certainly angling for him, and that would have been the move. Sure. But as soon as he doesn't get on this roster, it's just the management itself leads to low morale. Okay, so it's publicly available information that they wanted to like kick Razork out of this team. Does that necessarily motivate Razork? It depends on the team. Like Mad Lions, actually, I thought they would be much more affected by these attempts at roster moves in the offseason, but they've actually done pretty well and seem to maintain rather high spirits and relatively good performance to the caliber of their players so far this year. Now, the other side of that is the team demotivated because they're losing these players? I mean, look at what's happened. They lost Upset. And yeah, maybe some of the players didn't like playing with Upset. From what I know is that not everybody likes playing with Upset. He's a grinder, man, and he has a very serious attitude towards the game. And that can put some players off because I've heard he is demanding of his teammates, and as normal as
no one ever talks about that, Monty, because that's one of those ones that really counterintuitive if you're a fan. Because I don't know if you know this, but NBK and CSGO had the same reputation in all the French teams in CSGO, right? Which was, they never think he was a bad player. They actually didn't like that he was too serious and wanted to practice too hard. I know this sounds bad because you're all like, but they should all be pros. No, it's the other way around, guys. You're thinking if you're the guy who's really working hard and then they're slacking, you're the one who'd be pissed at them. Not in some Western teams. Like, as you can see, let's be real. It's now been Reckless and Wonder, mate, and Upset. Wonder clearly just wants a more chill vibe in his teams, mate. He doesn't want to be like the guy who's grinding himself to oblivion. Apparently, he's one of those guys who wants like an old Fnatic lineup, like the Expect here ones, where you fuck around a bit, but then you just play seriously for the right matches and you get in the playoffs, right?
Yeah. Well, and I think so, when it comes to losing Upset, you already had to deal with that blow, but you keep Humanoid and Razork. And I think the Humanoid and Razork synergy is just a mirage at this point in time. And I think the mirage looked a little bit more real after Worlds because Razork really hard carried Fnatic through summer playoffs. And then Humanoid was great at Worlds. He was very good. We got to see a return to the form that got him onto Fnatic in the first place. And the thing is, though, that it was never both of them playing well as a duo. Yes. Like, that has still never happened. Okay. Yep. What happened was they were performing well individually back to back, but not even at the same time. Really. Not
and
even
you notice it was nearly always like individual pop-off, like it was an outplay or a mechanical. It wasn't like when Razork carried, he was like doing the greatest jungle job on the map. He just got a load of ganks off, basically, did some mechanical outplay.
I think his Poppy play in summer playoffs last year was very good. But it just goes to show that they've been able to hit highs, very high highs, I would say, individually. But it's never been about their synergy, and it's never been about their communication. And that, to me, is the fundamental problem, because it's not a question that these guys can be good players. Like, we know they are good players. But why I say it's a mirage is we got to see that, the last available data points to Fnatic were, oh, these guys actually are performing better towards the end of the season. But I think you have to take that with a grain of salt and say, well, yeah, but was that because they've actually fixed the mid-jungle synergy problem? The answer is no. Yet this is the part of the roster they maintain. And maybe they didn't have a lot of options after Elyoya, Mad Lions like shopped Elyoya and then fucked up selling him. But they also, fucked up the Upset situation, right? They lost Hylissang. They decided to go with Rux instead. And Hylissang did have a disappointing
Oh, it was terrible.
Yeah, you know, summer playoffs and Worlds, but he certainly looks revitalized now. And I think you have to ask, it's always a hard read, because when you have pro players that are underperforming, maybe it's the environment. And if you're Hylissang and you have to deal with this entire year of your mid jungle just seemingly being unable to even communicate basic information to each other in how they play on the map, maybe you're just demotivated. I mean, look at what happened to, let's say, in Korea. BDD had a very bad season last year. Very bad.
Oh, he did.
His
He was
worst ever.
non-existent.
He was trash. Keen was very bad last year. But both of these guys on KT are arguably the best players in their position in Korea. That I don't think BDD might be. I think probably it's Zeus in top lane, but they are at least in the conversation for being the top players in their position in a region.
Yes.
And so that revitalization just goes to show that sometimes players, you know, they just phone it in when they're on a bad team. And I think Hylissang looked very good over the course of the winter split. He certainly was like top 2 supports alongside Mickey X. I think you could make a pretty good argument for. And so I mean, what happens, you know, maybe these players are underperforming, but what happens if Humanoid or Razork get on a different team where it suits them a little bit better? But the point is that the Fnatic GMing decides to keep both of these players, and then you're left with Wonder, who we know in the right environment can do very well. Wonder's a very, I think, hands-off player as a coach. He just kind of has the natural ability, and you got to let him play a little bit more of a casual style, like you're saying, Thorin, and maybe he doesn't want to do all the hard work all the time, but you just kind of have to not push him. Because
you know,
that's where
he seems to come with a very good set of references as well, Monty. Like, if he, you know, the whole problem Wonder has is that perception that he was like a humanoid. He's, you know, he doesn't give a fuck or whatever. Like, difference is that's never borne out in the stories. There are no, every teammate and coach tells you, actually, like, just half of that's a meme, and he is like a legit guy, and he's making him practice. Yeah, he comes with such a great reference.
I just think he's more laid back. You know what I mean? He's just more laid back, and I think perhaps he doesn't do well with, you know, somebody who's in his face, like demanding performance, because you just kind of have to leave him to his own devices.
To me, he sounds like the guy who can just do his homework without having to do any extra work. So he's like, well, then why should we go to study class? Like, but the point is, some people need it, you know. That's where I see like the dispute is. Exactly.
Yeah, it's a good analogy. But anyway, so here we are with no upset, right? You replace him with Reckless, then you go back begging to upset. Reckless finds out about it. That's all. Your team morale must already be poisonous.
This is mismanagement and a half, exactly.
Yeah, your team morale must already be poisonous.
Let's piss off the guy who stayed, by the way.
Yeah,
that's so mad, isn't it? I know.
It seems like the Fnatic way. Just piss off the players that stay.
Think about it. That's like like your long-term girlfriend finds not even like evidence you cheated on her, just an elaborate fantasy plan you had of how you wanted to cheat on her, but then the person you were going to cheat on her with said no, and now you're like, but I'm back, honey. Exactly. I love you though. It's like you've already ruined this relationship as well. Now it's so awkward, isn't it? It was already pretty bad, but now it's even worse.
That's exactly the reference I made on Power Spike to the situation, where it's like, you know, Sam Matthews and the Fnatic management is upset is their ex-girlfriend that they're trying to go back to in the relationship with their current girlfriend. Is like, no, I didn't mean it, baby. You're good.
Yes. And by the way, this all loops back into the original point I made. Like, one, here's the part that no one bothers to ask about with the whole Fnatic thing. You know, the story goes that apparently the reason all those other ADCs, including Upset, declined the starting spot on Fnatic was they heard you have to play with Rocks. Now, here's the question. Why are they painted into that corner? Who the fuck is Rocks? It's just some guy who stood in for a couple of games. You know what I mean? Like, that's the mistake Fnatic made. Why have they put all their eggs in the Rocks basket? So now the best AD in the West not only won't play for you, but now has gone to a bloody rival. Like, that's mental in itself, because that's a massive fuck up. Like, as far as I can tell, that was one of the main things that also made Upset. Like, well, I'm not having an even worse year than last year. I'll just tank my stock completely. And spoiler, he's one of those rare people like Doublelift who were right. Actually, sometimes you sit out, don't tank your stock, wait till someone's desperate, and you get to just ride back in like the cavalry and save the day. And you never had to put in any hours playing on SK or Astralis or some shit team where, yeah, true, you're gambling that you ruin your whole rep and you get called crap, etc. And then the other thing I'd say is this: so far, if Yamato Cannon was still in this team, Monty, one of the knocks against him would be things like the lack of synergy between Razork and Humanoid. Well, we've now seen that ain't fucking Yamato Cannon, is it? If anything, Yamato Cannon's the only person who appeared to have found some sort of a band-aid for all the flaws they had in the team. At certain points, guys, he was band-aiding Razork, Humanoid, and Hylissang. And three, you know, I'm aware that's not even a band-aid at that point. That's like I come in and 3 of my limbs are blown off and you're putting band-aids on. Like, I ain't walking. And in this scenario, they're bloody running. They'll come in third. Remember, they were supposed to be in the final. They went to Worlds. And at Worlds, by the way, I agree, that super team completely failed. Still did dust off fucking T1, who almost won Worlds in a game with Razork popping off at that on Poppy or whatever. Like, mate, that was actually that's a one-off banger. That's just a testament. Like, if you think Yamato Cannon did nothing, I don't think people know. They really think he can do nothing and the game just happens. Like, he did everything there. He did the draft, the practice, the thing, and then he got results. He got some top places. He got the odd run. So, look, I'm not saying he's the best coach ever, but again, if you're Fnatic, what was your choice? Like, you know, what are you choosing between?
I mean, I think Yamato Cannon did a lot with some synergy between his players that was clearly broken, and he really MacGyvered that lineup into relevancy.
Yes.
And I think that's a massive credit to him, because I think this particular group of players, he was actually fixing the damage that the GM has done. And if anything, you ask Yamato to stay on Fnatic and you say, okay, how do we address this situation? Because, wow, you did a lot with the pieces that we had in spite of all of the problems, but he's not a fucking miracle worker. He can't change people's personalities in order to mesh better, which, as far as I can tell, seems to be the central problem of Fnatic. It's not an individual player ability. It is that this team cannot function as a unit. But none of us can say why that is, because we're not in the room with these players. Like, I have no idea what exactly about this group of personalities isn't working. But Yamato does. You know, Yamato does. Like, why would you get rid of the guy who actually knows how to at least make these players work well enough together to go to Worlds, and try and get him to be the architect of some new team? And it's clear that many of the players still like and respect him. I mean, they're on his stream all the time talking to him, and like, you know, he still has a very good rapport with like Wonder and some of the other players on this roster. So, I mean, I think this roster needed to be retooled, and it's almost like they make the worst decision every time, Thorin. It's like, now after last year, we only have the defective part of this roster, which is Razork and Humanoid. Like, this is one of these guys needed to be changed. And I think unfortunately the one who needed to be changed was Razork, because Humanoid, I think, has a higher upside.
Basically, Sam Matthews did a fucking Anakin Padme meme, Monty, where he was like, you know what, guys, I've heard your complaints and there will be drastic changes in the offseason. Then Padme is like, you mean to Razork, Humanoid, and fucking Hylissang, right? The bad players, right? Right? And then he's just like, because he did make, listen, he lived up this, he made drastic changes, just all the wrong ones. Yeah, he just made the team even worse. Basically, he fucked it completely. Yeah,
I think they got bamboozled by the individual highs of Razork and Humanoid, like I said. And we do know they were trying to change out Razork, but maybe they couldn't find the right player. But
I don't blame them for that one. Like, look, the upset one and the Razork one, I can see all those ones they zigged when they should have zagged. Those ones could have gone differently.
Yeah, but I mean, we also know that Marcoon was available during the offseason, and Marcoon was no slouch last year. And if you wanted to take Advien, well, Marcoon and Advien had instant synergy back when they were playing together on XL. So I don't think Advien is a great player. But I do think
he's LEC quality, but he's just
he's pretty good.
Yes.
But if you really needed to replace Hylissang, but I think if you talk about, okay, if you need to replace Hylissang for whatever reason, then maybe having the upset Advien, Marcoon, Humanoid, Wonder roster in retrospect, that probably looks a lot better. I think Marcoon's having a great year.
By the way, there was one last angle on the Yamato thing I want to hit, because I think this is what might seem like a counterintuitive point, but you might get it if you can understand how players talk, right? As you said, Monty, Yamato is very popular with his former players, by the way. Like, not only do you never see them trashing him, but as you say, most of them actually actively participate in content with him, have like if he interviews them, they have a very friendly relationship with him. One thing I've always thought was a very underrated skill he had is seemingly like people skills. If people don't know, Yamato is one of those people who in football, European soccer, is like a big fan of coaches like Jose Mourinho, where he's one of those guys like a Phil Jackson, where he has the tackling aspect, but he's also more about like you build a relationship with your star and you figure out what motivates him and you know which button to push. And you also, it's the idea, it's more of like a European approach, because obviously there's many like there aren't timeouts in the same way, once you can't implement your strategy directly. The European approach to management or coaching is more like you try and inspire, you're almost like the muse. You try and draw the great performance out of the player. You make him want to run harder when it's a game where he's already done like mad up and down the pitch, and give more to give you the extra go. Like that's what you're trying to do if you're a great manager. I think Yamato has that, because not only have I seen him get like performances out of individuals, but I also get the vibe like he actually is the whisperer to some degree. Because if you notice, one thing I thought was, there's two angles to this I want to hit for people. One is, if you think, oh, that's just because he's a cool guy that all the pros that he played with are nice to him. Some of the pros we're talking about are the biggest name, most arrogant people in European League of Legends. They wouldn't prop up a coach who was a fraud and they just liked as a person and say he's a great coach. They wouldn't do that. They would be the opposite. They'd flame you. And then the second part, and this is quite a key point to understand, is I actually think that Yamato is also someone where, if you look at his career, I actually think he's someone as well where, where was I going with this one? What was I doing before that other point? Let me think. So I was doing the point about him being man management and talking to the players.
I mean, he was a pro player too at one point in time.
What the fuck was my second point on that one? I had another point on that. Let me think it
I'm
through.
Sorry.
It's all good. I want to just get to that last point so I can get it out.
Yeah, I mean, I would say like at least he also has the cred with pro players because he was one at one point in time. And I will say, just in my personal, Yamato's a good friend of mine, and even when he was like 19 years old, he was incredibly mature for his age.
He was. And people don't know. I think he was coaching dude at like 22 or 21 or something mad. I know he looked super pro because he had to suit him, but he was actually quite young. Yeah.
I mean, I started working with him on like analyst desk when he was 19.
Right.
And he was incredibly mature at the time, super easy to work with, very professional. I also think that his language skills probably help with a lot of the players that he speaks with. He's fluent in 4 or 5 different languages. So, if he can talk natively to, Swedish and Polish players. And he just really understands the world of being a professional player and has lived in it for so long. And he's seen so many different teams at this point. He's traveled around the world. He's lived in Korea coaching. And so he's just very calm as a person, very stable, doesn't get flustered, has great game knowledge, has great people skills. Like, I can
segue this in now. Now I know what my point was. I've got it back now. Here's the point, right? Here's how you know, Monty, that he is doing some kind of like whispering with the players and getting them all on the right page. It was when you said earlier about the morale in the team. Dude, have you seen the morale in teams this guy coaches? Even a super team that had completely imploded, Monty. There was all those stories behind the scenes of like, well, there's no way these guys are playing together next year. Some of them don't like each other. Maybe they did the wrong move, right? Think about this. If you had a super team, Monty, and it was going to be good at one point in a split, but then fail, it wouldn't do this, Monty. It wouldn't fail and then get really good at the end and succeed. It'd be the other way around. You'd start out good and then become bad. And at the end of the split, you wouldn't make playoffs. You'd fail. You wouldn't make, well, dude, that actually implies he had to have done something. Because anyone who saw Fnatic in the summer split last year, sort of like the halfway or the 2/3 point through the regular split, they were done, mate. That was a team you could have bet your life that XL and Vitality and all those squads would be the misfits. You could have guaranteed this team would just miss playoffs. They'd have to break the squad up. Everyone's fired. No worlds. Instead, they just made playoffs. Why would you rally with a super team that's failed with all broken relationship? That implies someone's holding that motherfucker together. Something is holding that together. So he got them to rally, go to the playoffs. In the playoffs, remember, they got murked immediately, but then did that lower bracket run all the way through. All the way through.
Yep.
And remember, they were even potentially going to make the final if Koi hadn't played out their mind. So like that, and then go to Worlds and, as I say, win a game off the team that wins the world, or was going to win the World Championship, almost won the World Championship. Like, that implies he has to have done something again. I think people are way too reductive about coaches. If you really think you sit there, it's why I can't handle the grabs analysis of Reddit, dude. It actually gives me like brain cancer. Because think about it. They really believe he just sat there saying nothing, Monty. And that Caps, right? This is how dumb y'all are. Because Caps has really sick fingers, you also think his brain knows all the wave states in a game of League of Legends and all the macros. He doesn't. There's no player like that in the entire world of League of Legends. Even the best Asian player right now on an LCK or LPL team does it with his team and his coaching staff. That's how they implement those aspects of the game. Like the idea that like these star players, they're not geniuses like that, guys. Like that doesn't exist. Why do people still think like this? Here's the problem, Monty. It's actually an age-old issue I have in esports. I've always explained it like this. I think people think knowledge is linear and it's like levels on Pokemon. And they think that because Faker was like, let's just say Faker as an example, he's the highest level Pokemon ever, Monty. So they think that means he has every level below and every other skill set and knowledge in Pokemon in this analogy, right? He doesn't. He's just really, it's like top trumps. He's skilled in certain areas and in other areas he's just a normal human. Like no one person has all this knowledge. Like it's all coaching staff, it's all teams, it's all support networks. Like that's why I hate that angle that like Yamato does nothing because he has a good voice. Grabs just did nothing and then Perks and Cap. Did anyone see these teams, by the way? Am I the only one who's been watching these teams? I've seen Perks playing 2 different teams without fucking Grabs now. The drafts look pretty shit without him, mate. What are you on about? They play, by the way, I was told that it was all the players and that Perks was just good at AD. Perks left and G2 looked like a totally different team with 4 of the same players and the same coach. Like the impacts are so much bigger than people give credit for. It's so reductive to say these coaches suck. I'll tell you right now, I don't believe, I've always said this, Monty, I don't believe any coach can win the championship and suck. They might not be the best, but they can't suck. You can't suck. It's the same with shot calling. You cannot win the championship and have bad shot calling. You might not be the best, but you cannot have bad shot calling. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, there's a fundamental truth to that because you at least have to have your strategy enough together. And the way League of Legends works is that you can really dig yourself into a hole in terms of draft or in terms of macro. And it's not that any game is fundamentally unwinnable, but it's unlikely you're going to win a title if you start at negative 25% in both of those compared to your opponent. You know, it's not
exactly
likely.
Yes.
But yeah, I think he is underrated, and I think the moves that Fnatic has made continue to make no sense. And you know, they may just be backed into a corner now, Thorin. Like Oscarinen could be the best option they had if Wonder doesn't want to play on this team. But what does it say that nobody wants to play on Fnatic anymore? I mean, this is the same issue that you see when a team starts to lose prestige. It's all great to play on a team that has a high prestige value and everybody wants to go there. But once you lose that luster, man, it doesn't come back. And then you actually have to have competent GMing to make up for it. It's what happened to TSM. It's what happened to TSM, man.
The problem is I can't also handle that guy's name. Because it's like, what? You mean some guy who probably shouldn't even be on LEC anymore, the really obnoxious 1v1 who's just going to feed and lose all the time? More like Frostgur. No, whatever. Whatever. You see where I was going on that way. You see where I was going. Doesn't quite fit the vibe, you know, whatever. Because I don't even know when they've done that signing. By the way, here's a bigger point, though, and I think this is more alarming. I said it at the beginning, but people at the moment are just mainly talking about I know now with the problem is, if you notice between splits, we're sort of calling that off-season for some weird reason in League. I think we need a different term for that. Like, I don't know what you'd call it, but off-season to me should be like the end of the season before the whole season begins. I think the terminology is a bit scoffed. But in that period between the winter split and the spring split, obviously people are mainly still for Fnatic on those angles of like, but the upset drama and his rack string and what's. Here's the point that we need to address. Bearing in mind they've started 0-3 and there are only 6 more games, Monty. Dude, this team's going to miss the playoffs again. No, the groups rather. They're going to miss it again. Because look at the other teams in this, right? Even at the ones we were just criticizing Heretics earlier. Heretics surely can win a game against Fnatic. That's not implausible. They get one of those leads, they'll win.
I don't know. Maybe.
Like if you look at the table right now, like, yeah, Heretics probably also the other team that's going to fail. But like, why would any of these teams above them fail? You know what I mean? Like, even the smaller names, Monty, Astralis, BDS, these teams are better than Fnatic. They are. I know the names aren't, but these teams, like Astralis is way better than Fnatic, dude.
Yeah. I think the thing here is that with Fnatic, so first off, they had a tough week because they played XL, SK, and Vitality. Next week,
here's the problem. You're not allowed to say you have a tough week if you play XL. Like, which is it? Were they actually really good or were they worst team in the whole league? Which is it? If they were the worst team in the whole league and only changed one player, no, they do. But you know what I mean? Like, if people are going to, you can't give them a pass for that. That's on paper a win you're supposed to get, you know.
I think though that we'll get to this when we talk about Vitality, but I think that changing one player can have a massive effect. And I think XL needed to change a player just for morale reasons. The problem with XL is that the only team they beat was Fnatic, but also they played Vitality and G2, the two best teams in the league. So I'm not reading too much into that one just yet. But it was also like Odo Omne actually just putting Oscarinen into the grave in that game. And it was extremely one-sided, which is obviously a great sign for Excel because we expect more out of them. And next week will be a much different test for this team that I think are teams that are probably more of their caliber and not among the top two that we expect to go to MSI. But I think in Fnatic's case, yeah, they start 0-3. Now, Astralis did go 3-6 last split and actually make it to the group stage. So you can go 3-6. I would say that's really the cutoff. But I expect in the
Here's
future.
the question then. What 3 games are they winning, Monty?
Exactly. So let me finish. Is that I think that 3-6 probably in many splits in this format will not
be the
make
borderline
top
one.
8.
It'll be the one below,
It'll
probably.
not make top 8. Just because we ended up having a 1-8 and 2-7 teams last split, I don't think those are going to be common results.
Logically,
it's very difficult to only win 1 or 2 games.
When you have a 9-game round robin, logically you'll end up with loads of middle teams that are 4-5 and 5-4. That's just what will happen most times. Yeah, I agree.
So I think that, we may see some splits where 2, 3, and 6 teams don't make it, versus just having the 1-8 and the 2-7. So this is all to say that starting 0-3 for Fnatic and Heretics is a very, very, very difficult hole to dig yourself out of, because now you have to have at least one winning week to even make it to 3-6.
And by your logic, it needs to be next week, like you said, because they play Heretics, they play they play BDS, Heretics, and Koi. Like, if you can't get 2 out of 3 wins there, you probably are done.
Yeah, if they go 1-2 or 0-3 next week, the week after is Astralis, G2, and Mad Lions, which is harder. So it really is making it more and more difficult. But I mean, I think Fnatic is fundamentally broken as a team, and that this as in spite of what I just said about teams not going 1-8, this team could maybe go 1-8 or 0-9, just because I think they have no motivation to play.
You know what, as well, and this might sound like a weird angle, but I'm going to take it. I agree with what you said earlier. I don't believe for real that Razork and Humanoid are bad players. Here's the joke. I actually do think right now that Reckless looks like a pretty lost cause, because he's just kind of doing nothing, and he just looks bad, and it even looks like his morale is bad, and just no faith in the team, and he's upset with the org. Like, the problem with him is there's too many red flags. I think for real, the other annoying thing about this Fnatic team is you're holding up all the talent. Like, can't Humanoid go and play on like SK Gaming or something where he might like pop off and revitalize his career? Can't fucking Razork go and be on like fucking BDS or something? You know what I mean? Like, these would be cool moves, mate. Like, let this talent go elsewhere, and they actually can maybe turn their career around.
Yeah. I mean, I think basically Fnatic is just a waiting room for the next teams for Razork and Humanoid, because obviously they're going to get offers based on their previous highs. It's just, I think that there isn't a reason to play well for this Fnatic team if you're on it, because the management seems to have chipped away at everything that was making you successful, and the fall from grace from going to Worlds to now has been so complete, and the players that they've kept are the ones that obviously just fundamentally can't work together. So it's a very strange situation, but I don't think it's going to get better.
By the way, you'll notice I don't actually do the main focal point of the discussion most people do on Fnatic, which is just that Dardo guy. Partly because a lot of people don't know anything about this guy. They've just heard, but look, he had all these... Exactly. So what I'll say is this. The one area I will agree with the general sentiment goes like this. As we discussed earlier, this wasn't just like one bad move, or you did a move that could have worked, it just didn't work out. They did sort of, like you said, Monty, almost the worst decision in each set of circumstances they were presented, but about 7 times in a row. So I would say this would be a rare example where I wouldn't keep literally any of these players. No. I would release all 5, and I would go on whoever my general manager is. I would replace him with someone who has a vision for what Fnatic's going to be now, because clearly you need to totally rethink the whole squad, and that means whoever comes in's got to have I think you've got to have in mind, like, this is the player I'm going to gamble on to build around. I'm going to do this here. Because the other thing that's sad about this for me is, obviously there was a world where maybe they did get El Yoya, maybe that fixed everything with him.
I mean, they could have got Yankos.
Maybe that turned everything around. But here's the other thing. That opportunity isn't coming again, because if you're El Yoya, why would you ever join Fnatic now? Now it's not even worth it for the money, dude, because you know the team might be shit. So I think, unfortunately, that was their one chance to maybe get the sort of retool this roster. So if I'm them, I'm just changing the whole squad after this. Unless they have a miracle turnaround now and somehow people just look way better. But that's the other thing. Because they've also sort of shredded some of the name value, you don't even feel like this. I know because it's Fnatic, you think they should do a turnaround. If you actually look at the players on paper and then in the server, why should they be a top 8 team? Like, I actually think it would be reasonable for them to be the 9th team, Monty. I don't think it's like an unfair judgment at all. It's about how they play.
Yeah. I look, there are some good potential GMs floating around. If you don't want to get Yamato back, like, what about Deficio? Deficio did an amazing job, I think, of GMing Misfits on a low budget. So why not go? Yeah, why not go to him? I mean, he still works for Misfits, but he's not working on
Origin before
anymore.
that. Dude, think about in Origin. He's the one who whispered and got fucking nuked up Alfari and Upset on budget into a team. Guys, those were like some of the best players at their positions. He had them on budget playing. So I think if you gave this guy the Fnatic budget, man, he could fucking maybe make you a champion.
Yeah. Yeah. So I don't know. I'm not sure how much of the Fnatic budget actually exists anymore, to be fair. I think a lot of teams are spending bigger than Fnatic is at the moment, especially with teams like Vitality and Excel. And SK was actually trying to spend big this offseason too. They couldn't necessarily attract the players, but now that they have a little bit more prestige and they've shown that they can put together a good roster, maybe that would be an opportunity, for big name players to go join SK as well. So yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting conundrum for Fnatic. I do think you have to dump everybody. Like you said, I don't know enough about Dardo to actually opine on that. And for all we know, Dardo is being pressured by team ownership to make these decisions. He could be a figurehead. We just don't know. He could be disagreeing with them actively, but having his hand forced by the management of the team.
If the evil genius's Danny scenario has taught us nothing, take this as a conclusion. Just because an org says they have a system or says someone made a decision does not mean that they did at all. Because I've heard within Evil Geniuses, for example, we all thought like they had complete control. They had the keys to the car. We find out now, Monty, they weren't even allowed to choose who was the active players in a fucking match. Like,
right.
So sometimes the org they always like to present it like it's just the fault of the coach or whoever. Like sometimes, as you say, some of these people behind the scenes will even just tell you, like, look, I would have been fired if I didn't do what my boss said. So they just do it. It's not my style. I'm a different type of guy. But a lot of people, they just value job security and they know, like, you have to. It's all that shit they have in American corporate culture. You know, you got to be a team player and take one for the team and all that jazz. Like, I hate that personally. But yeah, I agree with you. Like, who knows who's doing these decisions in Fnatic? Who knows?
Yeah, that's why I think it's, the decisions we know have been bad, but unless there's an investigative report that says who made them, it's just, without being in the team, it's just very, very difficult.
Here's why, I'll even go one further. Here's why it can't just be the Dardo guy. Keyword just. Because what people are forgetting is this, Monty. You notice one of the reasons why I like to remember context is because it lets you go back in time and remember, oh yeah, I didn't see things how I see things now. And you can sort of remove the fucking hindsight 2020 vision glasses and remember that everyone's eyesight is flawed. So here's the analogy, Monty. When this team, Fnatic, announced their roster for spring last year, everyone on all my shows, including me, was like, this is an amazing roster. And in fact, they should win everything. So if the Dardo guy built that team, yes, we know now it wasn't the best, but it was still A, not bad at all. It was still a contender. And then B, on paper, it actually looked like it had amazing potential. Like when I saw that lineup, remember, Razork was coming off like MVP quality, split with Misfit. Humanoid was a stud who'd won and had all this international success even. You had Wonder fucking coming in. You got Upset there and Hillesang that was the best bot lane before. Dude, that looked like an amazing roster.
Yes.
So like, if you also agreed it was an amazing roster, then why can you blame the Dardo guy? He also didn't have access to the future. He also didn't know what was going to happen.
Exactly.
So it's like with XL, mate. I'll flame the fuck out how bad XL played, but I thought they were the best. I thought they were going to be number one. So I can't go, this GM and XL needs to be fired. Because by that logic, my brain needs to be fired. I thought the same shit,
No, I think it was a very good roster on paper that people should have been excited about. Like Razork and Humanoid were two of the top free agents that Fnatic went out and courted. Upset was amazing. Hillesang Hillesang and Wonder have huge legacies within the LEC. There is nobody who would have said that this roster looks like shit. Sometimes you just get unlucky with personalities and synergy, guys, and that's just how it goes. Remember when Misfits put together their super team years ago? You wouldn't have said that roster looked bad on paper, but they turned out to be terrible.
Didn't even make the playoffs.
That's just sports, man. Like sometimes you just get
Yes.
fucking unlucky. Sometimes
Yeah.
you just get fucking unlucky. And honestly, Fnatic didn't even get that unlucky because they still went to Worlds. At the end of the day, they still got the top 3 that they needed to get themselves to the most important tournament of the year. So it wasn't even that bad. So I mean, Fnatic fans are just horrible. So I understand why they're doing this. But, it really has just been the GMing decisions in the off season and so far this year that have been bad. I don't think that the underlying principles of the way they set up the team last year was bad.
No. Aside from like these 2 splits this year, I thought in general, like they've done a fine enough job with the roster.
Yeah, I think it was disappointing because we expected them to be better than they were. But end of the day, they finished top 3. They go to Worlds.
Yes.
Can't be that
I will
bad.
say, though, just as an aside, to wrap the topic, the other reason, if you're Fnatic, I would be concerned, is you've already hit the status that TSM's been in the last few years, which is, listen, right now, Reckless isn't what Bjergsen used to be. Nobody's joining teams to play with Reckless right now. That's not the case anymore. That was the case back in the day. You had an Expect here, Reckless, got a Caps. Of course, people joined to play with them. No one's joining TSM or Fnatic for a particular player. And then even worse, the downside, even when they were the best dogs, was you'd get a lot of flame from fans. Guys, nobody wants to experience what those fucking players like Razork go through. If people haven't seen the story, Monty, I believe Razork even like left one of those like fan discords because they just couldn't stop going in on him like directly and was just sort of like, fuck, I can't bother with this. Like that, it isn't like that. Like if you play on like SK or XL, listen, you might get flamed on Reddit, but like the fans aren't up your ass every bloody day.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean? Like that. Essentially, people will only put up with that as an obvious occupational hazard of being on the best team. If you're going to be like barely a playoff team and then also have all this bad scrutiny and no big stars to come and play with, you're going to actually get into like TSM. You're going to have to start scrounging around, mate. No big names are coming to your team. It's not going to happen anymore, I'm afraid. So that's also why, in my opinion, the decision you make with this GM, that's why it needs to be someone who can persuade players. It needs to be someone who's got the ear of like a big star player and can build a squad around him. Because it can't just be a guy we've never heard of, I think, in my opinion.
No, I agree with that. I think you do have to have the prestige because the only way you can rebuild is through paying somebody to bring that prestige to your team at this point in time because you've lost the luster. Vitality?
Yeah, let's do it. I mean, here's the thing, Monty. Spoiler, I'll give you a little tease because I already did this. In the title of the video, I just said in the title of the video, Vitality will win this split, the spring split. Because I mean, we discussed it a little bit on the last one. By the way, all of our speculations were absolutely accurate. Notice how everything we said was the case. 1, they can now play through all 3 lanes. 2, Upset's really good right out the gate. Spoiler, he hasn't even died yet. 3, magically, Kaiser's not the worst fucking player in the universe. It's like, yeah, dude, everything's fixed. I don't know how they've done it, but it looks fucking great.
Yeah. I think it just goes to show the power of swapping out a single player in the roster. If you really can take a superstar and slot them right in.
You're getting the absolute best player upgrade for that position. Yes, exactly.
But I mean, it does look like night and day difference. And it does. I also think, part of this is going to be that Kaiser has been and will be playing more engaged supports at the time. But I think even that can be a little bit misleading because he was dying at level 1 as Nautilus in some of these games at the end of last split. So it's not like he was looking amazing even on champions that you think might suit his play style a little bit better. But it really is, and perhaps it was just a motivation issue or a synergy issue with Neon on that bot side. But damn, this team turned it right around, looks great again. I will say the caveat is they started strong last split too,
they did,
and then fell off a cliff by the end. So maybe
here's the problem, Monty.
Pump the brakes on this one, but looks great.
I've thought it through, and the wording is totally legit. And anything that happens in people's minds is up to them, Monty. I can't control the way people's minds work. Spoiler, if I could, it'd be a very different scene. So all I'll say is the obvious joke, but I'll phrase it very carefully so that we can all have fun, but not get in trouble. So all I'm going to say is, Monty, I know it's early days. We've only seen 3 games, but people did speculate. Obviously, there should be improved comms between Kaiser and Upset because they're both German. So I don't know what it is. Maybe there's just something about the German language that makes following orders easier.
Damn.
I told you I'd be very careful. Here's the difference. It's not like back in the day where I would just say the shit and there'd be some Reggie angle and we just get wrecked. Like, we get away with it now. It's all good. It's all good. It's all good. It's all good. Exactly.
That was just the right amount of spicy, I think.
It was. It was.
But
by the way, another angle I have on this team as well, and this is one that I think's mad missed, is bearing in mind now they do have, like, let's be real, like the best ADC is on their team, and they have the best top laner. The jungler's in contention for the best. Like, fuck it. This, like, now is almost like super team status, dude. This looks really, really, like, this is the reason why I'm so hyped. Look, it's not that G2 couldn't win the split. G2 was a very strong contender too. The difference is, the reason I dream that Vitality gets really good is, I think this is the team that could do something internationally if they're good, bro. The fucking ball factor upset. Like, this team could be really dangerous.
Yeah, and I think that's what we're all hoping for too, because with MSI having 2 teams, we want the second European team to also potentially do some damage.
You don't want any fucking Koi or Mad Lions. Come on, guys. Come on.
Yeah.
Send these 2 teams, please, please.
Yeah, you guys really don't want to see what happens to Koi or Mad Lions when they start hitting like T1 or
they would get
JDG.
murked by the Asian teams, mate. They would get so murked.
You don't want to see that. But I do think that G2 has enough star power and also has the kind of crazy factor to surprise people. They're genuinely a very good team. And this iteration of Vitality, if Kaiser is performing to the level that he has in the past, it's very difficult to see what the weak link is going to be, because a lot of these players do have international success, such as Perks, right? Or they are really, really promising at a mechanical level, like Bo or Photon, or these guys that have shown they can really hold their own. And there's no reason to believe that Photon would be, outside of nerves, would be performing poorly internationally. He's not at the same level as some of the top, like, Korean or Chinese top laners, but I think he could hang okay. He could hang okay.
Dude, I know everyone's obviously bigged him up, and we all even said he's the best top laner and stuff, but, like, I don't think people are taking this into account. Like, one, he actually technically at the moment is the better rookie out of him and fucking Bo, who I think on paper should be like the best rookie ever. And then secondly, has the Photon guy yet had a bad game? Have I missed it? Dude, he never has a bad... Even when they lose, it's like he actually does well, or gets, like, kills in lane, and then they just don't win with him as the top laner. Like,
it's
what?
also,
like,
when his team is behind, sometimes,
bad.
you know, he makes the teleport flank play that gets them back into the game.
Yeah,
as well.
to,
like,
course,
he's a playmaker.
I think the guy's a stud, mate. It's just crazy how consistent he is, isn't it? His floor is really high as well.
Yeah, I think he's super consistent. I think he's done an amazing job with this team. I think he was overall the best player on this roster throughout the split. Maybe he didn't have the same highs, but he certainly didn't have the lows of some of his teammates.
Yes.
So
also, as an aside, I actually had an abstract concept I wanted to run by you and see what you think. Another reason I also think on paper this is going to be amazing. I've always bigged up that I wanted Perks and Upset to play together. But even stylistically, I think they're an amazing pairing, Monty, because not only are mid and ADC traditionally the 2 best roles to carry through if you're not Korean, because bizarrely, if people don't know, Koreans just always had all this amazing top lane lineage, etc., and they could have the weak side ADC. Every other region, it's about strong side ADC and a strong mid laner. Right? Not only are those 2 people who fit those roles, but I've always said this, and so I said it in my video about this topic. I actually think the mistake with a lot of super teams in the past is when the 2 stars like that are the same player. Like, you know, when Reckless joined Elements, the problem he had was him and Froggen are the same player, but playing AD and mid. So you just end up with, like, a very limited style because the 2 players have I think what you want actually is you want people who have contrasting style. So what I love about Perks is his whole shit's like he's going to pull out the fire, he's going to do the crazy clutch play, the decisive thing. He's going to go and make a play. He's not trying to perfectly CS like Larson and just winning. He's not trying to chovy the game. He's more in the Faker Xiaohu mold. So the good thing is Upset is that guy, but for ADC, he's the super consistent, high floor, always has all the meta champions, will always do. If you have the 2 together, you just have the complete team. It gives you that, it gives you the options as to what you do, and you cover each other's flaws. Like, if Perks has a bad laning game, bro, he's got the best side laners in the game. He's got Photon and Upset. If someone like Upset is just laning, but it's just going average, he's got the guy who can do the hero play. It's not all on his shoulders, 1v9 at the end of a game. I actually think there's another aspect is you want people who, like, complement each other with their strengths. It's not the same strength or the same weakness, or you'll be too one-dimensional, I think.
Yeah, I think the on-paper roster, I mean, we said this about Vitality before, though, that, you know, surely this must be the time that it works. And the strong start is a great indication. It's also the way that they're winning and the way they've looked much more dominant, and that snap of the fingers, all their bot lane woes seem to be fixed. It looks like switching Neon out was the right call instead of Kaiser, that perhaps that was the issue, or the synergy was the issue, and Kaiser was going to be able to rebound. It's what we said, especially because the way that Riot seems to be balancing is towards Kaiser's strengths, that he's probably the player that you keep. And then also, it has to do with the available free agents on the market. When Upset is just sitting there, there's not the equivalent Upset support that is currently unsigned to a roster that you could make a massive upgrade on. So you upgrade the difference between Neon and Upset is much greater than, there isn't a better option than Kaiser that I'm aware of. You'd be taking a risk on a lower level player that might have more upside in the future, but it's just an instant upgrade. And I think that at least Perkz, if there are some potential personality issues with Upset, that Perkz is a veteran enough player to kind of mitigate that quite a bit, I would think. And honestly, I'm pretty sure Photon is used to being criticized about his play and being held to a higher standard because he came through the Korean training system. So maybe that problem just doesn't exist. And like you say, Kaiser is also German, so he's used to the bluntness in many ways.
Like, that was a part
who is going to be perturbed? Like, who is going to be perturbed by Upset being a little bit blunt on this roster?
That was the part about that whole Danny thing that I thought got a little bit missed. Because if you notice, I was very light on mention, like the idea like teammates might not have liked him. I just said it as a general thing. I didn't tell you who. But like, it was obviously implied. Like, here's the problem. Because what you have to understand is there was a good and a bad. Like, the bad is this, Monty. A lot of Koreans especially don't get the idea that you have mental health problems. Their whole shit's like, just play. Like, dude, just play. Like, we're paid to play. We just do our best. Do as many hours as you can. Quitting isn't even an option. You're not even allowed to sub out. Like, that's their vision of the game. But the other thing is, the good part is this. That's why those coaches and the other Koreans were like, sub him immediately. If he's having problems now, get him out of the team completely. So it's like, in a way, there was like, it's like it covered for itself. Because that could have been really brutal if they were just essentially hating on the guy because he couldn't play, but they thought you should play like a Korean would. But the good side, as people noticed, was once they identified it's a problem, like they would in Korea, they sub you off the game one of a series, guys. Like, they don't sit around and let you tank for months and months. If they think you have problems, they go, right, that's very sad. Get the fuck out of the team. Like, they're immediately. So the good news is, yeah, like you say, like,
LPL's the same way, right? LPL's the same way. They have enough redundancies that they don't. They have a more brutal competitive structure because there are more options, so the teams can be more cutthroat,
Yes.
and have players that rise up and can replace them. So I don't know. I think this team, what I would assume about their personalities is that these guys all are pretty fierce competitors and want to win and can hold each other accountable in a way. And that's an environment that you want. And I still have faith in their coaching staff. I think Carter did a really good job on Misfits last year. It's a great change that they've made. It seems to have borne fruit immediately. And I'm very excited to hopefully see this team internationally. I think that finally we have arrived at the Vitality roster that can win the league.
Yes. I think we switch up and do like LPL or LCK. You want to do
All right.
it?
Yep.
Right. What about, let me see. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Look, we've bigged them up a fucking million times, Monty, so we just do it now. Like, there's a reason, by the way, I told you guys out there, if you want to talk about dark horses, I already knew mine from the beginning of the split. They're called KT Rolster, and they are the fucking dark horse in World League of Legends. Like, between them and over in the LPL, Weibo, bro, these teams, it's like what makes them infuriating is they can beat the absolute best teams. So you go, awesome. But then you just see them also play some mad sketchy game against some, like, sixth team, and you're like,
That's
so it's
awesome.
like, yeah, like, I love them when they're the underdog, basically, Monty. If they're the underdog, I love watching a KT Rolster game,
Yeah, I think KT is very good. What gives me a lot more confidence in the KT that we're seeing right now compared to the KT that we saw a couple weeks ago is that we're seeing an iteration of this team. So if we roll back a couple weeks to when KT was losing to Dplus, or not, sorry, not Dplus. When they were losing to Dplus and T1, so they had a hard week. And I think what was key to remember about that week, and I said it at the time, is that KT didn't seem to be playing KT champions and playing a style that made sense to them. When they went up against Dplus, they tried to take away the Lucian and Nami from Dplus, who is undefeated with those champions, and they are just bad at playing Lucian and Nami. They're not that team. Like, you know, aiming and Lehens are not those guys, and so we got to see losses where it seemed like they were doing a poor imitation of their opponents. And part of this was caused by the fact that Dplus had identified if they first pick Karma on blue side and they take away the Sejuani and the Jax, that KT really didn't have a lot to stand on at that point in time. And I think that T1, while being the better team than KT at the current point in time, we expected T1 to win that series, but they did dominate in a way. And KT also just, they were so reliant on scaling up, aiming in the bot side on Ezreal or Zeri and using the Karma as a crutch to kind of get him through the laning phase and not get completely shoved in. And scaling up on the Jax on the top side and using the Sejuani in the jungle. And then that would be combined with BDD playing a champion like, you know, Azir, a typical control
Classic.
mate.
Yes,
yeah,
classic.
and BDD is an exemplary Azir player.
Yeah.
So I think that what we saw from KT was a little one note. But what has happened to KT since that point in time has been that the next week we started to see a pretty big shift in their style. I think that they realized after that hard week that they got exposed and that they weren't going to beat these teams in the playoff if they didn't have additional depth. So this is when, starting with their victory over Gen G, this is when we start to see a new style emerge in KT. And it's not that they can't go back and do the things that they were doing very well. It's that now they can play a bunch of pick compositions that they were just not running before. It's when we saw the excellent draft that they had in Game 3 into Gen G when they punished the blind Akali pick with the BDD's Twisted Fate and basically made the game completely unplayable for Chovy. So the new thing that KT is doing is that they are running compositions where basically every single champion on their team has single target crowd control. And they will just control vision extremely well because KT was a very good vision team beforehand. There were points in this season where they were not actually buying a lot of pink wards, but they had among the highest cleared wards in the league. So they weren't spending a lot of money, but they were being very efficient with their vision. And if you watch the way that KT plays, it's almost like clockwork. Every time there's a dragon, they always have 5 pink wards. They're not overbuying them, as has been the criticism from people like LS. But then there'll be just a ring of 5 pink wards around the objective. And I think they realized that while it was great that they could do a team fighting style with this, what would be even better if we know we have vision control is to just pick somebody off as they enter the river, as they're trying to contest themselves. And we can do that if every single champion that we're fielding has a single target CC. And that's what they've done. And they've been very successful with it. And here's the thing, that style has now opened up their old champions, which we also know that they're good at. So now the draft against KT, the draft problems that were exposed in week 6 don't exist anymore by week 8. So it was a very quick adaptation, I think, from their coaching staff and from their players. And it's just been really, really good. And now, in addition to, seeing things like we saw previously with the Karma, with the Ezreal, the Zeri, the Sejuani, the Azir, the Jax. Now they're running compositions. Listen to this: Renekton, Viego, Annie, Zaya, Blitzcrank. Like, Lance has played 2 Blitzcrank games now, and he has been incredible on this champion. And the reason is because they're just so good at running these pick compositions now. That is not a composition that is going to win you a traditional 5v5. But if you can get a pick off and get Viego rolling and snowballing, but becoming other champions at the start of a fight, if the Blitzcrank hooks somebody in, you chain CC somebody, get the Viego reset, and then continue the fight. It's really great to watch. So what we've seen is a complete dimensionalization of KT strategically, and they also have had players that are performing extremely well at an individual level. I do think BDD is in the conversation for best mid laner in the LCK right now. I think he's been really good.
Along those lines, I want to ask you this. Should Aiming be an MVP candidate?
Probably not at this point in time. I would have considered more of an MVP candidate for summer last year rather than this year. I think the problem is this, Thorin. I think Keria is so clearly the MVP that it's even hard to have a conversation about,
Yeah.
about anybody else.
I'm with you. I'm just meaning, should he be in the conversation, basically?
Yeah, maybe. But I also think BDD is probably even the better choice for KT this split. I think, I mean, if you watch some of this, what can't he do at this point in time? Like, we know his Azir is great. His Yone's been great. He can play the melee champions. He can play the control mages. Looking good. Not that it's hard to look good on the Annie, but looking good on the Annie right now. He's just a massive, massive threat. So, yeah. I mean, I think what's fun about KT is that they really have hit a new level of depth that eluded them previously. And their quick response to kind of getting decoded by some other top teams led them to reach new heights and achieve new things. And now they play differently. I mean, they play very differently. Like, if we think about KT stylistically, they're much more likely to run Talia, for example, in the mid lane. GP has not been a super common pick, but Keen has been fucking great.
He's good on it, man.
On GP,
definitely.
Which adds, you know, another level to it. Oh, sorry, there's 3 Blitzcrank games now. Excuse me, I forgot about the one versus Brion later in the week. So we've had 3 Blitzcrank games from Lehens. They are a tough team to deal with right now. It is difficult to, because if you don't ban the Karma, then you know they're just going to go back to that, and then Aiming becomes this late game Ezreal, this late game Zeri that's a total monster. It's good. I mean, it's a good time to be KT, I think. It's a lot of weird pocket picks.
If you're only casually following LCK and you don't know where we are in the season, there's only 1 week left, guys. And the best part is, if you go back to the conversations we had at the beginning of the split was all about T1 and Gen G are just so far ahead. Dplus is a bit disappointing. You know, let's see if Hanwha's even good. By the end now, unless something goes drastically wrong next week, these playoffs are going to be fucking amazing in LCK. Yes. This looks like it will actually be one of those ones where you don't just wait till the final, the semi-finals. All the series could be bangers now. Because the cool thing is, this is another reason, by the way, why the whole MSI format just levels up the fucking scene. Because if it was only one team, it's just going to be T1. It would be a pretty boring story. The second team out of Korea could be really interesting with how these playoffs play out. As we said on the last week, it's even more so. The bracket will determine so much about it. As we said, maybe Gen G is the team that KT will upset. But then again, who the fuck knows what happens if Damwon plays KT? You know what I mean? There's so many interesting matchups. It looks like it's going to really be a banger to me.
Yeah, it's going to be really good. And I think at the very least, the top 4 teams will be excellent. The question marks will be around Liv, Sandbox, and Hanwha. And Hanwha hasn't performed as well against other top teams. But I will also say this. Zeka and Kingen, when their backs were against the wall in the gauntlet heading to Worlds, and then at Worlds itself, stepped up in a big way. So I think Kingen has also had some better games recently.
I still don't believe I don't care, Monty. Listen, here's the thing. I sort of low-key begrudgingly will give it to Zeka because he did it too many times. I still think that Kingen guy, mate, that, we always like to invoke the whole concept of the monkey's paw. No. The Kingen one, he just sold his soul. I'm telling you, there's no other explanation for how that final went the way it did. On every level, Monty. His play, how his opponent played, the draft, none of it makes anything. He just he sold everything. He spirit bombed his entire life doing that one series. So there's no way he's getting away with it a second time. I'll give you Zeka. If he gets his champions, we know he can pop off. There's no universe king will ever be an elite top laner. I don't believe it. I refuse to. I refuse.
I'm just gonna say.
Basically, Monty, I'm the pleb, right? Your question goes, but what if Kingen actually was in the future a really good top laner? I'm like, but he isn't, Monty. He is not a good top laner. I'm the guy who had breakfast today, it turns out. It's me all along. Because I refuse to believe that one. The eye test does not check out. It does not check out, sir.
It doesn't. It doesn't. He's a very inconsistent player when he's off tanks. But he actually did okay this past week against Keen and Zeus. And remember, now we can argue that Hanwha should not have won a game against KT, that
of
KT
course.
definitely threw game 2, which
Yep.
they did. Like, that was the joke that everybody was making was that was a 3-0 for KT, which it was, by the way.
Classic.
So but they did technically win a game. I think their win in game 1 against T1 was much more legit. That was actually a very well played game, I think, by Hanwha Life compared to their series against KT. But they did actually take games against 2 teams that may be the top 2 teams in the league right now, and they've struggled against the better opponents, but they've absolutely dominated the bottom of the standings. So there is a floor to this team, especially with Viper still being amazing, that exists, that can potentially do something for Hanwha, and maybe in the playoffs they'll do something. Now, there's obviously no hope for Live Sandbox at this point in time.
Oh, they're beyond fraudulent. Like, they're just a waste of time.
But I think the rest, the top 4 and potentially the top 5, if Hanwha gets their shit together in the playoffs, could be very, very good. And while Gen G's looked a bit weaker, the KT and Dplus have gotten substantially better, and so the top 3 is looking really spicy.
Dplus is peaking at the perfect time. Yeah, absolutely.
And all the teams are really different too.
Yes.
Like, they're very different stylistically from each other, and that makes it incredibly entertaining.
Oh, what's so crazy is this. Look, I don't think they've done it intentionally. If you know Korean teams, I think it's probably more just a byproduct of the roster construction. But the crazy thing is, Monty, this is the split where if I did the nameplates covered, look, you would know from the style that it was LCK. But if you're talking about like individual player, but if you looked at like macro styles of the teams, this is the first time LCK is more like LPL. And as you say, all the top 4 teams have totally distinct styles, drafting style, what champions they prioritize. This isn't the old LCK where everyone just copies number 1 and is a worse version. That's also, I think, why it's so vibrant. Like, the vitality of these matches, ignore the fucking pun from LEC. The actual, like, these matches have a life to them that they didn't before.
Yeah, I think that's what's been making a lot of the matchups more fun, and especially this last week of competition. T1's locked into first seed, so they're not going to give a shit. But, you know, the battle for second place is real, and the battle for second place is very important because that puts you in, it gives you a bye into the playoff bracket. Because remember, for those of you guys who don't know, we have a new playoff system in LCK this time around, which means that the 3rd team selects either the 5th or the 6th team. So they get to pick who to play against, which will be Live Sandbox, spoiler. And then the 4th team will get the other team. But also, that's the single elimination part of the bracket. Whereas if you're in the top 4, whoever wins that match, T1 gets to pick the winner that they want to play against. But that's where the double elimination part of the bracket starts. So by getting the top 2 seeds, you are getting into the double elimination part of the bracket automatically, and you are getting a bye through the first round of the playoffs. And that is going to be hugely important. And right now, we have a scenario where Gen G, KT, and Dplus are all within a game of each other. KT plays Kwangdong and DRX. So all they have to do is take care of business against teams that are significantly worse than them. I say that after Kwangdong beat Gen G, but we'll get to
the
that.
Freaks one is the more scary one of the 2. Maybe they could fluke, like, you know, a 3rd game scenario, sure.
Yeah.
They do it against people somewhat frequently.
Right. But I mean, KT will be aware of that, especially coming into this last week where we got to see Kwangdong playing like Aurelion Sol and maybe some other picks that aren't quite as common in the LCK as they have been in like LCS and LEC. And I think KT will be able to take care of business, but who knows? They're KT. The thing is that while T1 has nothing to play for, Dplus has to play T1 and Gen G in the same week. So 2 of the other top 4 teams. And while they might beat T1, Gen G is going to be fighting them tooth and nail to get that 2nd seed. And then it might come down to just purely game differential. If they're tied, that'll be the first tiebreaker, and that should set things up. So Dplus is on a huge win streak, 6 games coming in. KT's on a 4-match win streak. So Dplus has been taking care of business, but this is a really fucking hard week for them.
And if you look at the records, because Dplus has the 1-game advantage on Gen G and KT, if you look at the schedule's almost perfect to give a chance that they're all tied at the end, Monty. You know what I mean? Like, there's actually a very good chance. You know, it's a 3-way tie for second.
Yeah, and then it'll go to who has, you know, won more games. So if KT 4-0s this week, they'll be at plus 13. Now Dplus has an advantage because they're at plus 16 right now.
Yes.
So if Dplus goes 1-1, and or 0-2, then they're gonna, first off, they'd be down 1 to KT, but it could set them in a tiebreaker scenario too. So it's yeah, it's gonna be interesting. It's gonna be interesting for sure.
Like, I actually think for real, LCK hasn't been this good for a long, long time.
Oh, it wasn't this good last year for sure.
I think we'd have to go back somewhat mad, like, mate. Like, we're probably talking like 7 or 8 years since it was this good. Like, the parity, it's not only like really good teams at the top, but then the parity is awesome. Like you say, the styles are fucking sick. Also, we've got a lot of talent in the league again now. Like, you go down to those middle teams, again, it's like we were saying, as part of it's because some of these are reclaimed players, but you go down to the 4th, 5th, 6th teams, dude, there are some big names on these fucking rosters, boys. These are like some of the former greats or people who might again be great.
And even the up and coming teams, like the rosters, like Kwangdong. I mean,
CV Max looks like he's killed it again, mate. This guy
exactly.
He's just got the eye on
Max team, right?
He's got the eye on
I don't think everybody on Kwangdong Freaks is going to stick around. Like, I'm pretty underwhelmed by Taehyun in particular, but Bulldog and Youngjae actually look quite good for newer players. And so I think there is something to work with here, and they are better than their 5-11 record would indicate for sure.
Yeah, I agree.
So
that's the team, like I said earlier. You just see every time they play a big name team. Look, the big name team wins, but somehow it just ends up in a 3rd game. And you're like, how the fuck do these guys get that 2nd game? How do they steal it every time? But they just do. That's why I know that CV guy also. Just look at his track record. He just makes it work with any team he has, mate. He's mental. The funny thing is, I do get the sense, I don't know if you get this vibe. No one's made this connection before. I get the vibe, dude, that he has some of that Reaper in him, where it's like he is just like, his problem is he is like a mastermind, but he's too much of an individualist. And if you know the way Korea works, they want it to be that it's all the org effort and all the glory goes to the leader. It's all that jazz, So the problem is, I get the vibe that, like, I can see why he isn't totally accepted within the Korean scene, but I do think he's a mad genius. I've loved watching his teams play, mate.
Yeah.
I mean, absolutely. I thought this roster should be the worst in the league on paper. Like, who the fuck are all these guys? But
I mean, maybe
you learn to trust. You learn to trust. Yeah, but even that's mad. Like, think about it. DRX and Longship are orgs that in the last couple of years have been among the top teams. Like, they're at the bottom of the table. Like, Freaks are nobody. They're supposed to be bad, in theory.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. But I do think that handing the reins over to CV Max is the right call for an organization that wants to develop their own talent. And CV Max undeniably has an excellent eye for players and then also developing those players. Like, controversies aside, his track record is fucking insane.
No, it's nuts.
He has probably developed more world-class League of Legends players than anybody else who's coaching right now. I don't even think that's controversial. I don't know if there's even a number 2 that's close.
I'll even throw this out there because everyone forgets it. Everyone remembers all the other really great players on Griffin. Lehens was on Griffin too, by the way. He's on that KT team we just talked about. That's a relevant team again. Like, the joke is almost everyone this guy works with end up being good. He even, as you've discussed on other shows, even obvious frauds like fucking Morgan end up being half decent. And that was one of the most outrageous players to ever play. Like, when Chovy was on that team, it was like, what's even the point of this? This is just actual, this is torture. This is some hellscape shit.
Well, and also, even though Kwangdong didn't have any right to beat Genji in that series, we can only take the results as they happen. And in their last 3 games, they beat Live Sandbox and Genji, which are 2 playoff teams. Like, they're getting better. They are getting better.
Also, by the way, that is one thing that is so weird about Korea, if you think about it. You'd think logically, Monty, since they are far and away the best region ever to produce top laners, why do they only produce straight fire top laners or complete trash cans? Because there's also all those meme fuckers that we all hate, like fucking back in the day, Morgan, fucking what's his name? Fucking the Sword. There's always the super. They make amazing ones or super whack ones. There's no in between for some reason. They're all fucking really good or shit, aren't they? Like,
and then Huni is both in one package.
Yes, in a way, he is exactly. He's got the full spectrum. Should we talk about LPL a bit then?
Yeah, I mean, we could talk about Dplus a little bit too, because I think,
yeah. I mean, obviously they've turned it all around completely now. Spoil if you track it. And I was mega skeptical like 3-4. Now they just are really good. You have to just give it up to them. They fixed it, guys. They fixed it.
Yeah. What's weird about Dplus is that it's strange. It's strange to think about how they have kind of turned things around, because they went from kind of getting caught out, not having not having the best macro. But I think what's really helped has been that Canyon is actually able to just play like Lee Sin and Viego and Vi now and be much more active in the early parts of the map. And they're playing more effectively with Showmaker as well. And they're getting combinations with Showmaker. Like Showmaker is playing Renekton into mid Gragas, and Canyon's able to play Lee Sin. So they have a Renekton Lee Sin. So they're picking like strong 2v2s that they can really work with. And they're also maybe not with in Canyon's case showing off the depth of the champion pool, but Showmaker, I think he's showing off the depth of the champion pool more than he did. He's not getting caught out. We're getting to see his Veigar versus the Jace. So they're opting into a safe farming situation against Jace, and also pretty good kill threat between Veigar and Lee Sin as well, especially once you get that kick and can like lay down the Veigar cage and then kick somebody into the stun if they're not caught out by it immediately. So I like what they're doing. Deft and Kellen continue to be good as they have been for a variety, a large part of the season. But they're just being tricky in the draft. And the thing that made Damwon such a delight to watch last year was that, especially when they were on red side, the number of flex picks they had was really fucking annoying for teams to deal with. And we saw that a bit in the game 2 versus Nongshim, where they early picked the Renekton. Dundun picks the Darius because he assumes he's playing it into Renekton, but they just flex it versus the Gragas and then take Kennen into Darius, which is it's a terrible matchup for Darius in the top side. So they're able to make a lot of these compositions work. And I like the drafts that we've been given, and now the players are not throwing games that they wouldn't have thrown previously, and we get to see those champion pools in action, particularly Showmaker. So I don't know what turned around for Showmaker. I don't know why suddenly he was looking pretty bad earlier in the season. He said he was burnt out, and then now he just seems to be like flipped the switch back to the Showmaker we know. So it's been good. It's been good. And Canyon's had an up and down season, but recently has been absolutely amazing as he's returned to more of these kind of early game, very active junglers. And they seem
also
to
his meta again now. You got the Lee Sin and the Elise and all that.
Oh,
shit.
that's what I'm saying. Exactly. Yeah, I mean, these are all like great champions. I mean, everything's a great champion for Canyon is obviously true. But it does seem that being able to be in highly active 2v2s in terms of Showmaker with the champions they've selected and picking less passive champions has revitalized this team. And like I said, Deft and Kellen were basically always performing. So
yeah, that's the key thing for me. That's the difference in this damn one against past ones. Dude, even the one that won Worlds, you at least had an obvious angle on the map of like, maybe we can get an edge in bot lane or we can draft for that. Even they had a weakness in that sense. The reason why now that Showmaker's level's back and Canyon's back on his shit, that they do look really strong, is because they also now have draft advantage in bot lane except against T1. Like, everyone else has to be scared of that Lucian army, mate. Like, if you give them that, they're just going to win. Like, they're probably the best in the world on that. Like, they're unbelievably good. So, like, now even from bot lane, you've got edges. So, actually, yeah. Now, the cool thing about Dplus is this. It looked, when they added Deft, like it was going to maybe be like a failed super team earlier this split. Now it just looks like a real super team. What's beginning to show the signs of being one. And then it is living up to the name value. Like, if you have a team with Canyon, Showmaker, and Deft, it better be straight fire. It better at least be contending for the title and go to the international tournaments, guys. Come on.
Yeah, and Kana's looking good too. And what I like is that we see an ease and flexibility with this roster. Because the thing about being deceptive is that when you see the Renekton that Dplus has taken, you think it's going to Kana because Kana is undefeated on this champion this year. But it's not. It's going to Showmaker. You know what I mean? So you feel potentially safe in taking a Gragas pick because you imagine it's going, but they will just sacrifice the good win rate for the better matchups and still do very well. So I love to see that. And I think Kana has been doing slowly better and better over time. And probably part of that too is that they just have more map control with the way that Canyon and Showmaker are drafting. So it's good. I mean, it's a very good thing. I think they're a great team to watch right now. Is really concerned about them mostly because of a motivation factor, but they seem to have stumbled into a meta that is working for them, and Showmaker seems to have gotten over his funk.
Yes, indeed.
All right, now we can talk about LPL.
Yes, do it. Because the funny thing is, I actually think the LPL right now, spoiler, like we are going to have a dedicated episode, don't worry. Like, I don't know if anyone saw, I think actually Andrew accidentally, the producer accidentally tweeted it, but this in theory would have been the LPL episode, but we just had an issue with the scheduling with the guests, so we changed our mind. But we will do a dedicated one because I also think this is a really great split. And especially because the reason why I really want to have an expert on is, like, it's a split I find really hard to make sense of. Like, the teams are so different in the LPL, and it's still so up and down. Like it's probably the craziest variance league ever. Like you can think these are the top two teams this week, and the end of the week you're like, where am I at now? Like because some of these results, there's so many of the big matchups haven't gone at all to plan. We've talked to some of the ones past. Like there've been so many times where the big name team actually lost to like the number 4 team or something. You know.
Another issue was that until the last 2 weeks, we hadn't actually seen LNG play against good teams, which they've been in number 1 in the standings for most of this split, but they also have some pretty obvious flaws, and they didn't necessarily play the cleanest games. And last week, they were coming off of a loss to EDG, which I think makes sense because EDG is like the best macro team and kind of the most complete team, and therefore is going to be able to find ways to shut down the very specific threats that LNG has, even though I think there is an argument to be made that Scout is the best mid laner in the world right now, and Tarzan might be the best jungle in the world. So they have very, very pronounced strengths on LNG. But now they come into this week and we get to see them beat top esports and then almost beat JDG and play a very entertaining and very legit series against JDG. And we would have said these are 2 of the top 5 teams in the world, and Top and JDG. Top probably fell out of that this week based on their performances. I haven't seen the games they played versus LGD yet, so I won't comment on those. But you know, top did disappoint, and this was the do or die week for LNG to show they're legit, and they won 3 out of their 5 games that they played against the top 2 teams. So they are certainly in the conversation for among the best teams in the world at this point in time. But as to your point, Thorin, about not being able to make head or tails of the LPL, the problem is because it's a single round robin, that the strength of schedule is just enormously important to evaluating LPL teams. And if you're very front loaded or back loaded, like we've seen LNG be, like front loaded with a bunch of garbage teams that they play against, and then back loaded with all of the playoff teams, it's difficult to get a real read. And now we have it, which is great because I really like LNG. They're a very fun team to watch.
Yes. I mean, one of the things I actually think makes LNG quite cool is, like, if I had to choose someone to go to MSI, I wouldn't pick them because they have flaws. And obviously I could have like a really well-rounded team. I could have the team like EDG with a good macro, or I could have some all-star lineup like Top or fucking JDG or Weibo. But I tell you what, in a weird perverse sense, I almost would like to see LNG go to MSI. And here's why, Monty. Because I actually think some of their flaws are glaring. Like, I think their ADC is actually fucking whack. I think it's just not a very good player.
Not very good,
I think Top's a little bit questionable, but the key thing is, what I would almost like to see perversely, Monty, is if you really have a super elite mid and jungle like they do, 2 Koreans, is that enough to just run through Western teams? Like, I'd love to see if they can take just those 2 players, Scout and Tarzan, and just dust off G2 and FlyQuest and Vitality. They'll just feel like there's another level to Asian League of Legends, mate, because they can do this against the best LPL teams like we're talking about. Like, in theory, they should get exposed in the LPL, right? But they haven't really. They haven't really, quite frankly.
I think the issue with LNG is that, so if we talk about their strengths, it's Scout and Tarzan are the carries of this team. And they've played every single like kind of champion matchup that you could possibly imagine. Tarzan is so good at pathing. Their early game is amazing. The synergy with mid and jungle is probably the best in the entire world. They really kill it, honestly. And we've seen them do it in so many different ways at this point in time, that it feels like they're pretty meta proof in those positions. Like we get to see the Maokai ultra 8k damage team fight, and then we get to see the great Lee Sin play from Tarzan, and they really are just in a groove right now. And I think I like Zika, actually. Like, the more games I watch of Zika in the top lane, the more I like this guy, because he's a weak side melee top laner. And there's nothing wrong with that. I think if they had a stronger bot lane, he would be really good because he's a really efficient player, honestly. he takes very few risks. He's really, really stable in the top side. Not a fan of his Jace, gotta say, but if he's on a Renekton, if he's on a tank, if he's on Jax, like, I'm pretty down with the way that Zika plays the game. And the way he controls his lane is very good. His flanking is extremely good. He actually provides really great pressure in team fights, and his positioning is he's almost always threatening the backline on a melee champion, which is difficult to do because you have to get your spacing perfect so you don't get caught, but they're still scared of you coming in. And his setup is very good in that sense. So I really like Zika as a role player. And even though the bot lane of LNG had a better series than normal against JDG, if you watch those games, the eye test between LP and Ruler is just, it's painful at times.
Ruler is the best ADC in the league, probably, yes. Maybe in the world, let's be real.
Yeah, he is, you can just imagine what this roster would look like with a better AD carry or a more threatening bot lane. And they would be potentially contending for a title. So I think it's amazing that they are doing as well as they are, considering that their flaws are pretty serious.
By the way, shout out to any LPL team that manages to have a top team, but not a really good ADC. It's like, are you even trying, bro? They do grow on trees over there. There are just so many ADCs. It's criminal. Like, the joke is, it's like if we talk about some of the other teams, there's names you guys don't even know, just look fucking fire. This splits look really good. Yeah. So, and by the way, here's a stat for you. I've got a couple of stats for you, because the problem I know that Scout will always face in his career, Monty, is this. To a Westerner, they think he's boring because they think, oh, it's just guys who play like a zero and that. Right. First of all, Scout has played 28 games this split and won on 11 different champions. 11. And then look at, I'll read his top 5 champions that he's playing right now, Monty. He's playing, no, he hasn't played Silas at all. He played Ryze, Jace, Azir, Yorn, Cascading. What even is that champion pool? That's like everything. Like, if he's a mage player, fair enough. If he was only playing like the fucking Ryze and the Azir, okay, that's one thing, Monty. He's got Yorn and Jace in there. This guy can play anything he wants, basically. Imagine, by the way, trying to draft against this fucker. If he plays Yorn and Azir, like, what? No, this guy he's the MVP, boys. And quite frankly, it makes it look even more obvious that his team, like we say, has massive flaws compared to the other contenders. And this guy just smurfs every game. Even in the games they lost, like that one you're on about against GDG, he was still great in that, mate. He's just a fucking stud. This guy's so good. He's so underrated.
Yeah, and especially because I think what makes Scout and Tarzan's performance better is that we know that they're not working with the best teammates, right?
Exactly.
And even if you like Zika like I do, he is a role player. Ultimately, he's not 369. You know what I mean? Like, he's not that guy, and that's totally okay. But you have to prop it up with some level of carry threat in the bot lane, and I do think it gives me worry, Thorin, when I watch that series versus JDG, and I think to myself, this is probably the best performance that I've seen from LP this year, and he's still a lot worse than Ruler. Like, he's still a lot worse.
Yes.
So, people might get mad because they like LP or Hung or these guys, but if that's going to be their best, unless that's the new standard that we get out of these guys, I would assume, by the way, that was probably an unusual high for LP, whereas Ruler has shown that he can play to that level pretty consistently. So if I replay that series in a playoff game where LP maybe isn't peaking, then that series is not very close, I would say. And I don't want to rely on a player like LP peaking if I could just get a better AD carry.
Yes. It's also just cool because I did have my concerns when I heard Ruler was leaving Gen G of like, great that he's just going to go back to being on an all right team, isn't he? But he just found his way to another like world's contender, so it all worked out in the end, didn't it? Somehow, who the fuck knows how, but it did. All worked out.
So I love watching LNG just because I enjoy their style, and I think they are overperforming. But frankly, I just like watching Scout and Tarzan, and Zika to a lesser degree, and seeing how far they can get with this kind of 1-2 punch in the jungle and mid lane against teams that are super teams that just have better players overall than they do.
By the way, You know, earlier in the split, when we had that 1 week where we said that Jingdong was like the best team in the world, and then they just lost the 2 series immediately, like after, like the next day, even, right? This is why, by the way, when you're analysts, you don't just go by the standings and go, well, I guess they're number 2. You use eye test and you speculate, look at the roster, because there's a reason why you, me, Dom, we've all been bigging up this Jingdong team, even when they had dodgy times, because it's like if they ever got it right, like they're doing in some of the big series, guys, when they win games, they win so hard. So they hit like a truck. So like this is a team where, look, yeah, it could have been a super team that failed, but when it comes together, this one does look amazing. There's a reason why a lot of people are hyped for this to be like the representative for MSI and Worlds. This could be a really special team, mate.
And I think what's so cool about JDG is that, especially in the bot lane, like you just can't give them Zeri, because Ruler will win lanes that he should lose on Zeri and then completely take over the game like 10 minutes before he should on Zeri. So you just you can't let him have it, because somehow he and Missing in that bot side, goddamn, they are able to work some magic and like win losing lanes, and then that creates problems that you just don't see, and it creates game states that are very weird for enemy teams to deal with, because they're used to playing with a lot of pressure into those lanes. And when that pressure is gone, all of a sudden, instead of taking a dragon for free, Ruler is on it, on Zeri at 14 minutes in the river, just absolutely decimating you when he shouldn't be there. He just shouldn't be there at that time. So it makes it difficult for teams to get reads against them. 369 is having an excellent season so far. He has been phenomenal. And unfortunately, I think the answer to, one of the unfortunate parts about JDG is that Kanavi is looking a little.
He's had a few sus games
right
for
now.
Sure. Yeah, he's had a few.
He's had games where he's like pretty hard griefed some of his laners, and especially 369 in top side, I think has been one of the worst, the worst players that he's griefed, right? And so when you see 369's performance, in spite of the fact that Kanavi sometimes makes his life really difficult, it's even more impressive, I think, from 369.
I also think I wanted to get your take on this, because I actually think when I watch the LPL, right, I actually think the biggest role that decides if you win or lose the game in LPL is jungle, dude. Because these junglers, like when Carcer has the off game, that's when Weibo just loses the game and they look like shit. When JJ has a fucking a Smurf game, they just beat someone they shouldn't be. When Kanavi plays bad, they look a bit lackluster. When he's on, like the junglers, it's because the best junglers in the LPL are all big name players that people don't know. Like you're talking Tarzan, JJ, like it's all the biggest names. So like, and those teams, it seems like it has a massive effect on their style, because these are all stylistically different squads, obviously.
I think it's a lot of times junglers in the LPL outside of Tarzan, I would say, take a lot of risks.
Oh, for sure.
In terms of the way they play, or they play pretty greedy. And so if you have a good punish, I mean, an example would be what the EDG JDG series. Okay. When was that? It was a few weeks ago. Let's look it up real quick. When EDG in week 5, when EDG 2-0 JDG, a lot of that was just JJ clapping Kanavi in the jungle. And Kanavi, he was basically mind gaming Kanavi to take risks and then punishing him for those risks. And it was really quite good by EDG. But, if you're JDG, they do well when their players are getting early game advantages, and they're extremely good at snowballing. But if you stop the momentum on them, that's where they sometimes have problems. And JDG also doesn't consistently make the best mid to late game shot calls. There are moments when they try and over push their advantage. I think actually they almost threw the game 2 versus LNG, because instead of just, they got an advantage and then they started pushing like top lane inhibitor turret while their Dragon Soul was spawning, and they could have just left and walked to Dragon Soul and gotten it. But instead they tried a really terrible turret dive, died, and then there's this big contest for the Dragon Soul, and it's just completely unnecessary, right? Like it's not playing tight League of Legends. And so JDG definitely also has like a throw potential as well, which is why I think they're not the best team in the world. To your point, when they are firing on all cylinders, they do hit like a motherfucking truck, but they're not consistent in being able to reach that state. So they're very scary when they're scary, but they can be kind of toothless at times as well, especially if Kanavi has a poor early game.
Yes. And then I've got to say this, right? Because I actually think the team that breaks my heart the most in the LPL is Top Esports. I know now it's for different reasons because Knight's not there. Dude, this is the team where on paper it's fire. And they early on when the strength of schedule was weak, they were looking good. I think this team's a bit fraudulent, mate. Like when I've seen some of their losses, they can look really bad in a loss, bro. Really bad.
Yeah.
Like they should be such fire on paper though.
Yep. I think Xingtian is kind of limited when it comes to his effective champion pool, and he has some very high highs,
He
but
can be
also,
night and day for sure, can't
he can be night and day.
Yeah.
Tian has been good, but was pretty bad in the LNG series.
Yep.
And Rookie, I think, started the season very well, but has kind of dropped off. I think he probably, if you think about the first 5 or 6 weeks of play, he was probably the leading MVP candidate. But I think that's switched to Scout at this point in time. Yeah, so I think Rookie has been struggling a little bit more as of late. And, LNG 2-0ing them was not something anybody expected. And like I said, I haven't seen the LGD versus Top games yet, but I will get around to watching those. But obviously that's a huge upset that went down. And Top is sliding down the standings, which is frustrating because this team should be quite good.
And also, this is just a team where, it's going to be tricky, obviously, but it's like you do look at those names and you're like, man, if this came together in the right way, though, couldn't it just be like one of the best teams ever? This looks so good potentially.
Well, and the thing about it is that this is a team that's like Dom1 from last year. It could come together at any point in time. There's no way to know, right? Yeah. And that's what we kept saying about Dom1. Is that, and they actually did have a pretty good Worlds run relative to their domestic performance, but it's just that the individual strength is so high that it could snap all into place in a moment, and it wouldn't surprise anybody. So they can't ever be counted out.
And by the way, I alluded to it earlier, but the KT Rolster, Monty, of the LPL is fucking Weibo Gaming, because this is the team that has the crazy high ceiling where they can beat anyone. But they also can lose to a lot of teams that are worse than them. Like, this is the team where, think about it, right? To be fair, you have in the same team Karsa and the Shy.
Exactly.
If there are ever two players who either dominate or go to shit, they're two of the all-time greats for that.
Yeah, I think Weibo is a team that plays to the level of their opponents, because we can't deny the fact that
their some banger wins.
Their JDG win was very important, but at the same time they have struggled against mid-table teams. I don't know what is going to become of this roster. This is the team that I probably have the most difficulty getting a read on.
Oh, it's really hard, mate.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure about these guys and whether they can get it together in time, because I love watching Xiaohu, and I think Crisp has quietly been one of the best supports in the entirety of the LPL this split. But because of the variance that the Shy and Karsa introduce, it's almost impossible to be able to predict whether this team is going to win or lose.
Here's the problem. I'll explain this via way of an analogy, which tells a amusing / embarrassing thing about my life, Monty. So I did one of those things where I ordered some food on one of those apps, right? And cause I'd just ordered like just some wok food, like some fucking fried rice with like some beef in or whatever, right? Cause this is the problem with the Netherlands, unfortunately. They're one of those countries that doesn't really like spice very much. Like, they think spicy is like, the most mildest flavor of all time. It doesn't have any heat.
Northern Europe is horrible for this,
The problem is you never fully know, right? Is this like am I buying from an Asian place, but it's cooked for a Dutch temperament? Or when they say spicy, do they mean Asian spicy? So I got this wok food, and because I don't want it to be bland, which would be the worst thing ever, I asked, there was a little option that said, would you like to spice your wok up? Which I'm assuming just put a bunch of spices in. But here's the problem, because it turned out I was wrong, and it wasn't Dutch spicy, it was Asian spicy. The option, would you like to spice it up, ruined the whole meal, because essentially they must have put like that actual like chili oil that they give you European, like, the tiny little, but it's way
Yeah,
too
yeah. I
spicy.
love that
They
shit.
put that shit all over the whole thing. So I was eating it. And then the joke is, obviously, I'm going, it's actually a bit too spicy. That's what Weibo is, because here's the thing. They're not going to win the playoffs. I'm not stupid. They're not going MSI. But I'll tell you what, I want some spice in the playoffs. It's just I'm scared they might be too spicy.
Yeah,
That's the problem. If they're too
dude.
spicy, that can get too dark.
It's a good analogy. Dude, in the when we were in Flashpoint, I always have, like you're saying, I always have trouble in Northern Europe and the UK ordering food, because unless you're to your point, unless you know the restaurant and how authentic it is, it's very, you just can't know. And so I made it when we were in, remember we were in quarantine for Flashpoint 2, and we were in Reading, and I tried to order some Sichuan food. Holy shit. That Sichuan food was an abomination, because it was like to UK taste, and it was like slightly too sweet and just like weird tasting. And I was like, oh, I just wanted some like spicy pork belly, man. Like, why does it have sugar in it? I was tilting. But yeah, it's tough. It's tough to make those orders in Europe, because you just have no idea what you're going to be getting.
Indeed.
But yeah, I do appreciate the analogy there. So yeah, I think when it comes to the rest of the LPL, it's also shaping up to being an exciting playoffs. And I love the fact that EDG seems to be doing so well, because I think that they are probably the most well-rounded team to compete internationally.
Yes.
And they've been such a awesome surprise, especially Leave, who, like Pays, is probably heading towards a rookie of the split award, and not something that we would have expected out of this roster. Ale has been very good as well. It's just all these players are, it's a synergy thing, and they play much more like a Korean team than most of the teams in this league. As Dom is fond to say, like, OMG is the most Chinese team, and EDG is the most Korean style of team within this league. So we get some good extremes at the same time. But EDG's just been rolling, man, and they've picked up a lot of really critical wins. They lost to Top Esports, but they beat JDG and LNG pretty convincingly. So yeah, it's a fun time. I'm looking forward. We still have 2 more weeks of the LPL. So not just 1 more week like we have of the LCK, but not too many good matches coming up this week. I think we've seen most of the good matches in the LPL right now, so it's mostly just going to be battles for seeding, without a lot of the other top teams playing each other. Unfortunately, like the good matches have pretty much passed.
The analogy I would give is this, right? It's quite similar to what I often used to do in CSGO. And I notice now, it's all right, you're welcome. Enjoy using shit I invented. I notice people just copy this. And they've even used literally this example, all the other analysts, where they do that thing where they just heard a good idea from someone else. So like, that is a good idea. That's not my idea. So what I always used to say in CSGO, Monty, to kind of explain to a casual fan the difference between the types of star player, is I would always say to people, if you're a casual fan who plays with the AWP, don't in any way try to emulate what Simple does, because you won't be able to do it. In fact, he even plays in an aggressive way with the AWP, a way that actually for like a normal player would be actually negative to your game. You'd be way worse. You wouldn't hit any of these shots. So I always say the player you should copy is the player Device, because what he does is he actually plays the game with his brain, basically. So he plays as if like he doesn't have the greatest skills. He has very good skills, obviously, but he just plays a fundamentally flawless game, basically. My analogy would be that everyone likes to watch Jing Dong and Dplus and all these teams with crazy stars. If you're actually someone who wants to learn like the concepts of team league, it's teams like EDG and Gen G you want to watch, guys. It isn't the ones with all the stars. These are the teams, in fact, the very fact that they don't have 5 bona fide stud players, but they can make their style works, tells you their execution and fundamental game plan just works. It actually means they're the best at that. So these are the teams, if you want to learn like the macro understanding now, these teams have got it down, boys. Like they can close games against the best teams in the world. They're not just getting a lead, they're closing the game. That's very impressive.
Yeah, it also means that they might be able to potentially throw, as we saw with Gen G,
or
get outplayed on an individual. I think Gen G is much more likely to throw a game than, given what we've seen both in this past series against Kwangdong and as well as the T1 series. Like, we're starting to get a little bit concerned that Gen G might be too throwy.
All I'm saying is this, Monty. I low-key sort of hope that something goes bad in Gen G, just because we could work in some sort of awkward skit about a Pays dispenser. That's the angle I'm going with here.
There you go.
All I'm saying, yeah, if you haven't noticed, by the way, one thing I did learn a long time ago about showmanship is it's a bit like being a rapper, Monty. It's not actually about you have to be amazing to make everything rhyme. Really good rappers just bend the words so it sounds like it rhymed. You know what I mean? Like use the slang. So it just makes it. That's all you do with the joke. Like, I crowbarred that like a motherfucker. But as my friend Jason Moses O'Toole did once send me, one of the loveliest messages of all time, he just said, this is a great old school reference if you know it. He said like that I have the best crowbar in esports since Gordon Freeman. That's it. That's a banger, Moses. That's a hell of a line. That would be on the poster right there, mate. Jason Moses O'Toole, you know, like perfect.
I wonder how many of the Zoomers know
a good reference, isn't it?
The Gordon Freeman reference as opposed to us post Zoomers / neo boomers.
Post Zoomers.
Yeah. So yeah, I think LPL is really quite entertaining right now. I'm actually very hyped about EDG. I would love to see JDG and EDG be the teams that go to MSI, because that would be a really cool contrast of styles coming in from the region.
Yes.
So that's my preferred outcome. And you know, I don't even know what my preferred outcome in the LCK is. Definitely T1. But I don't know if I like Dplus or KT better right now. I think either would be interesting to see.
That's why it's so perfect. They can just play and decide amongst themselves. Whoever wins will take it. We'll take that one. Just let them sort it out.
All right. I want to do some viewer questions.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right. So as you guys are aware, first off, we should probably talk about Freeze Pipe again briefly.
Oh, yes. Indeed.
So first off, thank you again to Freeze Pipe for sponsoring Last Free Nation. Really appreciate it. As you guys know, as we've said before, 420 is coming up, and each of their pipes or bongs or bubblers has this delightful glycerin chamber in it. If you just throw it into the freezer, don't have to put the whole thing in, which is very nice. Separates out really well. Throw it into the freezer about an hour.
Throw, of course. I would very delicately place it into the freezer.
It's a nice glass, so gently place it into the freezer an hour before you want to smoke, and then you can enjoy some delightfully cool cannabis. They look really nice as well. Very high quality. Also, their customer service is quite good. I know they've been very responsive to people. It's one of the best parts of them, according to reviews. I haven't had to use their customer service because all the pieces have been great. They did a good job of shipping them over. Comes in a nice packaging, feels like a pretty premium product. So if you guys are interested, you can head on over to thefreezepipe.com and use the promo code LFN for 10% off your entire order. So however much you want to get. Also helps us out a lot, obviously, if you use that promo code, because then it gets tracked back to us and makes it sure they know it came from you guys and that you guys want to support our shows by buying those products. So thank you very much to Freeze Pipe and to you guys for purchasing it if you have already. I know a lot of people have been commenting that they bought it and seem to be also very happy with the product. So it's going well. All right. So now we're going to talk about viewer questions. These are going to be via Discord subscriptions.
And shout out to everyone who signed up, because actually a lot of the people who used to have the Grog coin have signed up for them.
Yep. So really appreciate you guys signing up for these. We'll get there a lot this week. We'll get through hopefully all of them. We'll see. There's a lot. So we'll get through as many as we can. Let's see here. Do you have any ideas on things Riot can do to increase pick / meta diversity? Yeah, balance the game better. Interesting things like Carria's ADC picks or Barrel's Donger do pop up from time to time, but globally the same picks tend to dominate for long stretches of time, with a significant portion of the champ roster being untouched, even if they can be good. At the same time, forcing it in the form of something like Fearless Draft has issues, as you both said. Yeah, Fearless Draft sucks.
Here's where we take this, Monty. I know what angle to take this to. One of the points that he hasn't put into his question that I think he's omitted, maybe he doesn't know the historical context of how Riot has developed the game and how they've spoken about the meta over the years. But one of the real problems is this. Every time something cool comes along, so think about this, Monty. How about lane swaps? How about double jungling? How about having it where you can funnel into mid lane if you want? How about having it where you can flex everything between top, mid, and spot? if you haven't noticed, I've got this ADC support meta. Is it the players and the meta that takes these things out? No. Riot clearly hates these things and is antithetical to it, and they hard nerf them out of the game, either by directly nerfing them to oblivion, for changing game mechanics, or just buffing stuff that is, will beat it out in the meta. So unfortunately, I get what he means, but Riot seem to me like, even though I don't think they actually know where they're going with it, they seem like they have a very set vision of what League is supposed to be, and as a result, what it's not supposed to be. And so unfortunately, even though I actually think this carrier like AD support meta is fucking incredible, I think it's some of the coolest League of Legends in years. Sadly, I get the vibe every time it comes along, Riot just do the right whack-a-mole to make it go away, if you know what I mean.
I'm confused as to why this is coming up now, these questions, because I've seen a lot of conversations that the meta is boring. Guys, we just came off the best meta for a world championship ever.
It's fire, yeah.
It was great. This year, the meta has been really interesting, actually.
Good, yeah.
I mean, look at all the different viable styles right now. Look at all the innovation we're seeing from certain teams. Yeah, I get that some bad teams are like opting into Lucian, Nami, Zeri, Lulu every game. But if you've been watching Bangers only on my stream, you'd realize that a lot of the good teams aren't doing that shit.
No, like, and those bad teams lose a lot of those games as well. They're not like auto wins.
You guys are watching bad teams in bad regions and then complaining that they're bad. It's not that the meta is bad. I think the meta is quite interesting and quite good right now. And I think that shoehorning something like Fearless Draft, and we saw this with Overwatch League when they switched over to champion pools, right? They basically had to eliminate certain hero pools. They had to eliminate certain heroes from the game because the devs were so bad at balancing it for the professional scene. That in order to introduce variety, they would periodically change which heroes could be played at the professional level. That's been a conversation that people have had. The Fearless thing, why would I want to watch that is my question. Like, good players already have big champion pools or big enough champion pools, and you want to watch kind of the optimal way to play the game. You guys are basically just begging for a worse viewing experience because you're bored of watching good players be good at good champions, which makes no sense to me, right? I would rather be watching the optimal way to play the game than rather trying to figure out the best way to suboptimally play the game.
By the way, just in case someone's like lost on the term, the Fearless Draft concept is just that when you play game 1, for game 2, you can't draft the same champions you had in game 1. So essentially it forces you to sort of test the pool to some degree and expand out, etc.
And it creates artificial parity too, because then it like takes people. Anyway, it's stupid. I don't like it. There's
actually more downsides than people realize. Like, as you're implying there, one of the big downsides is now it becomes things like, it's not really about, did I win on that draft? It's like, I had one crack at that draft at this point in the series. Shit, I should have picked it for game 2. It's like, you just put weird things into it as well that are kind of counterintuitive, I think.
Yeah, and here's the other thing. I actually do think Fearless Draft is good where it was implemented, which is at the amateur level, because it will force players to encounter more scenarios.
If people don't know, the league that's using it is LDL, which is the development league of like the LPL.
Yeah, it's fine for that. Yeah, I actually think it's fine for that. But I don't think
showcase the person's skill sets, everything. Yeah, everything.
Yeah, so I think it's good for developing players. I don't think it's good for watching peak League of Legends at the professional level. And
dude, here's the part I find weird. I wanted to ask you this. The weird thing about people complaining about the meta is, the other reason I think the meta is quite good now is, dude, what's even truly OP? Like, everyone goes like, why are you giving Evie Cassante? Mate, you can give the best players in the world Cassante. You don't just auto lose the game. Zeri is still in the meta, but isn't even the most broken thing. In fact, the joke is, like you just said, all the bottom feeders just force the Zeri and lose the bloody game. Like, what is, it's not even a meta where there's like you must ban the Yumi. There's nothing. If anything, there's a lot of really powerful shit that you have to account for. That's what you want in a draft in a game like this, guys. You actually want people to have to make the hard choices among a bunch of super weapons.
I would also say that there's pretty big differences in draft priority between the two best regions in LCK and LPL right now. So, for example, I mean, nobody gets to play Caitlyn in LCK basically, but Caitlyn's up most drafts in LPL, right? So we don't even know, maybe there's a reason that maybe the LPL teams have found a better way to neutralize Caitlyn than LCK teams have, or maybe Caitlyn's just fucking broken and LPL teams are going to find out at MSI, you know what I mean, when it's actually run by good Korean teams. So there are pretty stark differences, I would say. Like maybe you could say, okay, Ash or Annie are very, very strong picks right now that might be OP. But those even those differ between regions in terms of their priorities. So I don't know. I feel like I am not currently disappointed with the meta diversity
no problem
at
all,
all.
mate.
I think it's been great. So it's weird to me that this conversation keeps popping up this year because amongst the good teams, I don't really see it as an issue. Thoughts on rugby? Have you ever watched / followed the game? When I lived in Ireland, I got into it a little bit with the Nations Cup and everything like that. I think it's a really fun game. I enjoy it, but I'm a very casual enjoyer of it. I like the culture surrounding it. It's good. I like it.
I think here's the thing. I would say, like, you nailed it at the end there. It's one of those spots for me. It's a bit like soccer in this sense. I think it's more about the culture angle. If you're with a group of people who like it and you're in the place that everyone's loving it, it's going to be a brilliant thing to watch. I wouldn't necessarily watch it on my own if I'm just sat in a room with a million other entertainment options. And the other problem rugby has as a game is it's also one where, like American football, you just get fucked up if you play it, mate. It's a really brutal game in that sense. So, like, I don't want to play the game, put it that way.
I do like it though. I like it a lot better than soccer because I like full contact sports. And it's more entertaining to watch, higher scoring. Like I like it. I like it. Who is the most underrated and most overrated player of all time?
Of all time. Let me think. Because the problem with this one is, like, I feel like for underrated, it might actually be someone like Scout, mate. Remember, this guy's won LPL, like MVP,
Worlds.
like Worlds. Like, bro, what does he have to do before you ever, like, get some status? Like, he's actually a really fucking amazing player historically, and with all different teammates. Oh, the guy's cracked. For underrated, he's in the category for sure, I think.
I mean, I think Score is probably still underrated by a lot of fans because, like, we still have to have the conversation with fans about is he better than Bengi, which is just fucking ridiculous. Score is probably, he's almost certainly the best player who's never won Worlds. Over the
basically
course of his
has
career.
the Dan Marino problem where it's like the actual eye test tells you this might just be the best player ever, but because they don't have the ring, they're not even allowed in the convo. Like, come on, bro. Like, have you ever seen that, mate? How many people do their top 5 quarterbacks? It's just all people with rings and no Dan Marino. Like, really? Because all I'll say is this one, and this is aged very well. I always thought back in the 2000s, mate, the most overrated quarterback was Ben Roethlisberger, just because he was on those amazing Steelers teams. And by the way, that's aged beautifully, because if you're the guy now who's like, my number 5 is Ben, it's like, mate, Dan Marino's about 20 times better than what are you talking about? What are you talking about? Look who he's thrown to. Nobody. The joke was it was the Marx brothers, wasn't it?
Yeah. Also, Tomlinson is a hell of a coach for the Steelers.
Yeah, look at him. He's like the baseline of that team's mega. So I would say for overrated, I mean, I feel like an obvious one, but I don't know because he's kind of also got the rep. Historically, it used to be Hooney, but don't people kind of also acknowledge he's a bit overrated now? I feel like people caught up to us on that one.
Bengi's probably the
Bengi's up there for sure because of the accomplishments, unfortunately.
I don't know how. I mean, Marin would be another one. Like, what the fuck?
For sure.
Jesus Christ! Like some of these T1 players, man, get mad overrated, and it's not that they're bad. It's just like Bengi is not in the conversation for greatest jungler of all time. Like, shut the fuck up. He's not.
Also, one thing I do want to ask, right, is can people who want to take part in this discussion just figure out their own position? Because one thing that does tilt me off the face of the earth, Monty, is the same person who, if they had the discussion about junglers, would tell me Bengi must be better than Score because of all the championships, then will tell me, even before this World's, well, obviously Uzi is way better than Deft. Well, which is it? Do accomplishments count? Because you know what? Death's got a fucking few under his belt, homie. Look at what you're talking about. All this. God, I can't handle that. It's like, pick which it is. Either you count rings or you don't. If they don't count, let's just do eye tests. But you got to go one side or the other of the aisle, boys.
Right. And Def's flaw, was that he hadn't won a title. And now I think he probably has surpassed Uzi as like the greatest ADC. If we revisited that video that we made like a year and a half ago with Dom,
for sure. Yeah,
I think that certainly would be one of the hotter topics. But the other thing about Score is that he also position swapped, and he was a very good AD carry before he position swapped to jungle. And going from ADC to jungle is not an easy transition to make. He's the only one who's done it super successfully. So yeah, really good. What is your favorite meat to smoke? And when did the Monty smoking meat videos start? I don't know if you want a smoking meat video. It'd be like pointing at a smoker that was closed for like 12 hours.
Takes a
Probably
long
pretty
time to
boring.
smoke it. Yeah, exactly.
I like a bunch of things. I mean, I've made like smoked lamb banh mi's, which are delightful. So like the Vietnamese style sandwiches, probably brisket overall. Brisket's like a good staple. The only thing Last Free Nation is missing is more Richard Lewis. Are there any plans for shows featuring Richard outside of the Four Horsemen? I mean, yeah, we'll have as much Richard Lewis as Richard Lewis wants to participate. We love him. I think Richard needed a bit of a break from being more active in esports, but my theory is that as the company spins up more, we'll start to see more Richard Lewis. That would be my theory.
The key difference is this: when it was just our YouTube channels, I mean, we didn't actually monetize the content well, so we could do a content whatever because it doesn't matter if it makes money or not. For the company, each project has to like have backing, have like a game plan, have like a long-term ramp up, etc. It can't. We're not just going to willy-nilly do stuff. So like basically, we could still do shows like on side channels and stuff on his channel, our channel, your channel. But in terms of the company, it's like we're not just going to willy-nilly pick up projects. If you haven't noticed, that's actually what the G4s of the world, I think, did a terrible job with. They came in and just got too many things on the board. They didn't have like a game plan. So we're just going to gradually add pieces. So yes, if the company goes well, we definitely will have Richard Lewis shows, but we'll have to scale as things make sense business-wise, basically.
And I think what we want to do around Richard is like some really premium stuff. Stuff about the history of esports and like his reporting that we have to have the right sponsors or investment for. But I think obviously we want to use Richard a lot more, and I think Richard would be attracted to some of these projects once we get them rolling. Why is esports filled with execs that have barely any relevant skills or background, i.e. someone with 5 years as a recruiter being a marketing director, someone going from product manager to CFO in 2 years with barely any finance background? Because they can advance faster in esports than they can in their own industries because their own industries are more developed. And this can be a good or a bad thing, right? Sometimes you hit a ceiling in your own industry where you are highly competent and there isn't a place for you to get meaningful career growth because there's so many people who are entrenched basically above you. So in a way, this is more Wild West. It's like, why did people leave the comfort of East Coast America to go to California? Well, it's because there was a lot more social and mobility. A lot of the times, like people were looking to reinvent themselves and, get their fortune. And some of these people were horrible grifters who abused the lack of structure. And some of these people were exemplary individuals who just needed a shot to be able to prove their worth and make it. So both can be true, guys. And I think that's true.
Yeah, there's a few angles. One that I've hit myself, I think I might even have said it like Four Horsemen or something, is whenever it's like the guy has too good a resume from the real world, that's when I get an alarm bell that tells me either that guy's original business is just failing, like maybe it's a sport like baseball, it's going downhill and he's fleeing the sinking ship. He's not coming to esports because he has the love for esports. He's just saying, let me use my pivot from what seems like a good, or his resume is just good, but he is the one who did it. Like he was part of a project that did X and Y and Z, but he was like the least important part, but he sold you that he was the one. There's that angle that could obviously get you someone who's fraudulent. But I think there's two other factors here. They're both connected though, which is basically people in esports, not only is it a new field, therefore in terms of like endemic skill set, it doesn't exist. It's why the idea of doing a degree to work in esports doesn't make sense. You do a degree in a skill set, which then would apply to esports, then your esports career begins. Like that degree you're doing at uni is essentially just spinning your wheels. Like, it doesn't really make much sense. So I would say not only is there endemically not really like an actual like set of metrics, you're always going off the idea of like, well, I've worked with this guy a few years and he seems pretty good. There's already that anyway. And then the last part to me is I think people in esports, they still are so far behind on this. Maybe it's because originally we were all the nerds and the guys who were the losers and the guys who weren't at the party were at the LAN party instead. Everyone still is so horny for mainstream recognition. They just want the world to tell them this is good. Yeah, this can go think places, guys. And so the people they hire to tell them that are people who have status in the real world. That gives them the validation. When they hear, wow, a guy from Time Warner's coming over to ESL. Wow, a guy from FIFA's joining LCK. they hear the name FIFA and like a starfucker, they go, "Oh my God, this is so sick. FIFA's like real football. What the hell, time? What? That's like a movie company. They're coming to it. Esports is real." So all I'll say is the analogy that'll give away that this is like a deep-seated fucking, I think, quite a dark desire within esports is, do you remember when all this stuff came along in the last 5 years or so that was about like, right, we've got to get more accurate with how we track views, and we've got to get rid of the view botting, and we've got to find out what does an esports view mean in terms of sponsorship dollars, Monty. People's conclusion in this fucking industry was, let's just have Nielsen rating come in. Holy shit. Guys, when I investigated some of the problems in why it's hard to know if a reported figure is true, when I looked into it, one of the first things people who know more outside of esports about views online told me is, you want to look in a Nielsen rating, mate. There's some mad fuckery involved with that. And it's essentially also like some dodgy ass thing where it's like who you are and what you do. So like the joke is Nielsen isn't even some ironclad amazing system. It's just because it's the famous system for television. Esports goes, we want to be validated like television. Can we have the same thing? So esports is just on some weird train like that where they're not even, they're going off name value in my opinion, you know.
I think the Nielsen thing is what esports is cynically using, because here's the thing, the boomers, and I mean by that the literal boomers, guys, not us, but the literal boomers make advertising decisions based off of Nielsen ratings. And even though everybody knows they're bullshit, we kind of got forced into using Nielsen a lot of the time because they are a trusted source that validates viewership that can then be compared to other forms of viewership. So I think that was just like, I don't think people actually believe in Nielsen. I think it was just a necessary tool to use to like to connect with people who have no idea what the fuck esports is and don't even necessarily care themselves that Nielsen is bad. All they have to do is be like, go to their bosses and be like, well, the Nielsen rating said this investment was good, so it's good. So that's my take on that one. But look, it's just Wild West shit, man. At the end of the day, there are going to be some good people that come in. And frankly, we need good people from outside esports to come in, because as much as I value endemic expertise, a lot of us have been the jack of all trades in esports. We've had to be to survive in a small industry, in a startup industry. You kind of have to do a little bit of everything, but that may mean that we don't have a deep expertise about certain aspects. And as there's more money that gets into the scene, we can afford to pay people with very specific and deep expertise in certain topics. And very few endemic people may have that experience. So for me, it's mostly about getting the people who have these expertise, who are excited about working in a growth industry, who want to learn how to be a little bit more of a jack of all trades themselves, and who actively listen to the endemic people. Because that's the biggest thing, is that the problems arise is when we get these assholes coming in who think they know best and then do exactly the opposite of what they should. And they may have expertise, but they apply it very poorly because of lack of knowledge about the nature of the industry they're working in. Now that Riot is investigating EG, I think it's a good time to ask, with the info we have right now, what do you think an appropriate punishment would be? And what do you think Riot will actually do? I think because of the nature of the partnership agreements that they have, because remember, these teams paid $10 million at least, maybe, more, 10 to 12 million initially, and then more if they bought the slot like EG. They can't be punished too heavily, right? I think the appropriate punishment would be that Nicole LaPointe Jameson and the other members of upper EG management can no longer have equity in the company or anything to do with the League of Legends team or Valorant team, for that matter. I think that is the appropriate punishment. Like, you can keep these people around if you want EG, but they have to be firewalled from Riot, the games that Riot is participating in, and they can't be on the cap table. So they can't materially benefit any longer from the Riot Association.
The key thing for me goes like this. In light of these three precedents, appropriate is just a term abstractly that we're discussing. These three precedents go like this. They took Monty's whole team from him, even though they acknowledge they have no evidence he ever actually did anything that they say was wrong. So they took his entire slot away.
Yep.
Then you have the Carlos one. Someone just did a tweet that people don't like. You associated you even slightly with someone that people don't like. That got an entire slot in Valorant taken away. And then the third one is Echo Fox, where because in a private email, someone said a bad word, the whole team has to end up getting sold through some circuitous manner. Those three precedents mean Riot can do whatever the fuck they want until someone takes them to court and proves otherwise. So in terms of what would be appropriate, the joke is Riot's already made some of the most inappropriate business decisions I've ever seen. So in terms of like the current trend, they could do anything they want to him. Take the org away, take the slot away, say Nicole's fired, say Nicole in the game of dog fired. Take the whole execs out if you want and say it has to be a totally new group of people. I think that, if in light of what they've done in the past, would be sort of in a similar vein. I personally would prefer something like you just investigate basically all the things me and Richard investigated. If you find them all to be true, I think at a minimum, you have to punish them in the sense that, like, as I said on Four Horsemen, this doesn't just look like a mild fuck up. This looks like they repeatedly had the chance to sort of do the right thing and they just said no. So in that scenario, Monty, I don't feel comfortable with those people being in charge of a bunch of young men's futures. I think they've sort of shown on this one like they fucked it up too badly, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think in my case, we have to remember that that was pre-franchising, so that they could basically just do whatever they wanted to me, and I had very little recourse because the limitation on liability was $25,000, and I had to go to arbitration.
The point here is this, Monty. Everyone's going to say, but at the end of the investigation, they're not going to find anything. They didn't find anything with Monty and they still fucking did it. So the point is, Riot's never needed to find anything, boys. Spoiler, they fucking took Dom's core streaming away because they maybe speculate he maybe made that comment about a woman, about nails. Like, Riot will do anything they want on the most tenuous evidence ever. So they don't need to have it ironclad. And in fact, when they fall back to like, but what can I do? My hands are tied. It's like, brother, your hands were never tied any other time.
The thing about Riot that you have to understand in my case and Dom's case was that they pretended that they could be inside our minds and know what our intentions are. That's is because they didn't like us and they wanted to get rid of us. So they decide whether they want to, they decide whether or not they are going to know what your intentions are. And that's how they decide punishments. Now, the reason why I bring up the Echo Fox thing is I think that's the punishment that they gave to Echo Fox was basically the same punishment that I advocated for here, which is they basically went to Echo Fox and they said, this guy said some really fucked up racist shit. We don't want him associated with our league. He cannot be a partial owner in Echo Fox anymore. And the reason why Echo Fox sold was that they themselves, based on their corporate structure, could not eject him unwillingly. So I don't think, because that guy was an investor and owned a larger part of the company, because Peak 6 owns the majority and has the control over EG, they absolutely could eject Nicole LaPointe Jameson from their cap table. They can do that. So I think that would be a very similar punishment, which is just to say, like, we cannot have this person be a partial owner on this team because of their actions. That would make sense to me. And I do think that it is in line with what they did with Echo Fox.
And by the way, I have a quick thing I want to just say to get it on the record, because I'm sure people who are legit and aren't lunatics watch this show. Like, we have a pretty good fan base in general. I have seen there is a trend that I find so disgusting, which is the only time people ever mention the context of that player that played in Monty's team who tragically passed. And by the way, if you don't know what you're talking about, shut the fuck up about this topic, because literally I have now seen that topic used against fucking Richard Lewis. You cretins, you imbeciles. You're literally taking someone's death, a tragic death, and you're using it to hurt the person who you don't even know helped that individual and was their most important person in the world. So, like, please, if you are someone, by the way, who's not a nutter, don't ever bring that topic up if you don't know the circumstances. The reason people don't talk about that one is it's just tragic all the way around. It was a bad situation, and the way it ended, no one wanted. Nobody had any joy in that, or it was not in any way maliciously done at the end of what happened after Renegade. So as a result, like, I'll just say, the track record is this: whenever anyone brings that up, literally your duty is to downvote that fucking comment, because there are people who didn't know this individual trying to act like they're the friend of that person, like shouting out, and the joke is they're doing it against literally the person that individual loved the most in the world. Which, that whole topic is going to be so uncomfortable uncomfortable, bro. Because people think we don't talk about it because it's awkward with you. No, you weren't involved in any way with any of the horrible stuff that person in Renegade. The reason we don't bring it up is because it's such a horrible story all the way around. Everyone wants to just put it behind us, unfortunately.
Yeah, there's nothing good that can come of it, guys. And like, you know, honestly, like if Richard held me accountable, like he wouldn't work with me. Like he wouldn't be my friend. Like, I don't know what to tell you guys. Like the whole thing is so fucked up. And the way that people talk about even my punishment is that things that happened years later are brought up as reasons for me being punished in 2015. It's like, I'm not a seer, guys. Like I can't see into the future. So it's just the whole thing's really fucked. I don't.
They even do the same thing with Carlos. They go, yeah, but he took a picture with a guy who's in prison now. He wasn't at the time. What the fuck are you talking about? So now Carlos has to, like a seer, like psychically see in the future everything that guy will do. That's not even a fair standard to hold anyone to. I wouldn't hold Reginald to that and go, well, years down the line. Like, no, he can only know what he knows at that time, guys. So the point is, like I say, I just think that topic only ever gets brought up in bad faith. So if you wonder why we dodge around on here, spoiler, Richard Lewis is literally one of our best friends in this group. He's in our company. He's the person who gets the final say on that because you weren't in his house. You don't know what their life was like. You have no idea what relationship those two people even had. He gets the final word. And not only is it so inappropriate that people use it against Richard, but as I said, Monty, it's in really bad taste if you're just a hater of me, Monty, or Richard, and you're using someone's tragic death as a shitty way to try and get at us. That doesn't even make sense. It's not even applicable. You didn't know the person.
You know, I haven't talked about it, and I'm not going to talk about it. But I also did things after the fact to try and help that situation because obviously I felt partially responsible for it. But I'm not going to try and score public points about what I did do, and I've never had a conversation like that's just not. It's not appropriate, and I'm not going to do it. So you know. I obviously feel terrible about that entire situation, and I'm going to feel terrible about it for the rest of my fucking life, guys. Yeah, that's it. So yeah, it's disappointing. So let's move on. How are you feeling about Russell Wilson's contract situation? Do you feel good or bad after the Sean Payton hire? I feel, well, it either is going to work or it's not going to work. Yes. It can't be worse than it was last year. If it doesn't work, Sean Payton is a great coach who will be there after Russell Wilson leaves the team or is cut from the team, and he can draft a QB of the future if they continue to suck. I would say I'm very... I'm optimistic about all of the free agency moves they made yesterday to shore up the offensive line. I think they made some really savvy moves. If you watched the Broncos last year, you know their OL was one of the huge problems that also contributed to Russell Wilson's poor performance. And I think with a better OL and hopefully a healthy OL, which was one of their problems, and the addition of Sean Payton, Russell has to perform in this, right? Like there's no other choice. They've been very active about trying to fix the main roster problems that they had. They are doing their best to set up Russell Wilson for success. If he can't perform now, then maybe he is washed. But his last couple games were very good. I think it's a good thing. As a Bears fan, I think you should be excited because I think it's smart for them to trade back the #1 pick. Getting DJ Moore is obviously huge. Getting future first-round considerations so they can set up Justin Fields is really strong. So I like the team. I like the moves both teams have been making.
Yeah, the problem I have with this move is this is where, again, the people who only use hindsight want you like, just kick him, get him out of the team, he's garbage. Like, are we going to pretend that entire time in Seattle never happened? Like, he was an MVP candidate for about like 6 years straight, like justifiably. Yep. Look, he wouldn't have been my pick, but he deserved to be in those convos. He was playing not only really good game, but he looked like he was playing like a very efficient style, quite frankly. Like, he didn't always have the craziest offensive weapons. Obviously, but when he first joined the team, they were a pretty defensive team. Like, I actually thought generally, like, look, it didn't work out, but this is one of those moves, a bit like Hillisang or a humanoid. You also know they could go to another team and just be really good again, don't you? It just seems obvious. Like, he clearly is a talented player. Like, he wasn't Jared Goff, guys. He wasn't just carried by like one team ever. Like, he's clearly just a really good quarterback. So I don't know what went wrong, but as we pointed out, if the coaching staff's something of a nobody, that's one thing you change before you change your franchise quarterback. At least try someone else with a different scheme. And like you're saying, fix the O-line, all sorts of things. Yeah, there's obvious things you try before you kick him.
The Broncos were hugely injured. Russell Wilson was injured. He had no protection. Like, if you just... this comes from people who didn't watch their games or understand their situation. And he did get better, especially once they fired Hackett, their head coach. And he seemed to get into a better groove, and they changed the scheme a little bit later in the season. I refuse to believe he is as washed as he appeared to be, because
I've got
that
a theory
drop-off
for you,
would be
mate.
absolutely insane.
Here's why I actually think people go so hard on him. And as I say, don't just meme, but they make it like he's trash, he can never be good again. They're just conflating the fact that, as we've all pointed out, he has a very weird and quite silly
He's cringe as
personality.
fuck.
Yeah, they're taking that, and because his game now suits that, they're acting like he was never good. Like, this guy was very good in Seattle. That wasn't fake, mate. I watched all the games. He was fucking good. He just was a good player, mate.
Yeah, and he's a very exciting and unique player too. So I don't know. I think obviously I'm hopeful. I don't think it could possibly be as bad as last season. I don't think it could.
Oh,
and
no.
You know what? If it is, whatever. Like a couple of years of this to get a top pick for a potential quarterback that Sean Payton can develop is a good thing. I also think that also named Payton, so it's confusing. Payton, their GM, is quite savvy and has been good for the team. So I like what they're doing. Sucks that it was such a disappointment last year, but can't be worse. Suppose the original holy war between LFN and TSM was held on the Rift, where each participant is reincarnated as a league champ that best suits their personality. Here are the rosters: Thorin, Monty, Richard, Barry, and Locodoco versus Reggie, Parth, Bjergsen, Doublelift, and Lena. How would the team comps turn out, and what kind of tactics / battles? It's a funny question. So,
I mean, logically, you're going to be the jungler.
Okay.
Just because you have the best macro knowledge, and you know, it just seems like that would be your role, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and because I have no hands, I would play Maokai, which is just about vision control and like zoning people off of objectives. Okay. That's definitely my style.
See, I feel like I don't know what you actually played in the game, because I know Richard did used to play many years ago, though he prefers Dota 2. I just feel like if we're going like thematically, logically, Richard Lewis is the top laner, because top lane actually revolves around like courage to know you're just going to be in a long lane and get ganked all day long and told your shit when you don't win like a losing matchup. Secondly, you always have to come in to save the day if you're a really good player, like TP in at the right time, which is literally Richard Lewis's whole MO. He is basically the cavalry that rides over the hill to save you in esports. Like, if people don't imagine, why do you think I was so cocky about that Danny video? Because I knew I have motherfucking Richard Lewis with a legally vetted article coming behind me. I can take all those people. It's all fake. Well, let's just wait a few days, shall we? I can chill on that one. And then I feel like also the other reason why he'd be a top laner is because, like, most great top laners never really got the help they deserved. They always left on an island to just do that work, you know. So I feel like that just fits his role too well. Look, the joke is this, right? Look, just because I've almost sort of switched up, Monty. I'm not as in on wrecking Loco as much, because that was the old meta and everyone's overplayed it. It's almost fun to like remember him fondly. So you know what? Locodoco was actually a professional AD carry who was very good at the beginning of his career. So I'll let him be ADC, because the reason it'd be funny, guys, is I'm obviously support with my pike, aren't I? And think about me as Doco's support. That fucking dynamic would be spicy as hell. The comms in that bot lane would be amazing, wouldn't they? Of course. Not least because the best part is, much like I did actually in a late episode of Little Loco, because I'm Pike, I might just fuck off out of the lane and leave him on his own. Did do that one time. Did do that.
Loco would definitely be Kog'Maw.
Yes, exactly. Because he's not allowed to play Tristana. Anything that can jump in, Monty, he's banned. He has to stay under the tower as Kog'Maw. Exactly. Yes, that's his role.
And it's also funny because even after you kill him, he still runs around and explodes hilariously. I feel like Locodoco is a very Kog'Maw type personality. Barry could be he can be the Galio in the mid lane.
Yeah, he'd just be some shit cat. It's Galio, Oriana. He just plays some basic shit no one cares about. Exactly. Yeah. Exactly.
And Reggie, Parth, Bjergsen, Doublelift, and Lena. Well, first off, Reggie would definitely be the mid laner, and he would force Bjergsen to jungle for him.
Yep. There you go.
That is absolutely what would happen. Doublelift and Lena obviously deserve to be in a lane with each other. So that being said, Parth is the top laner left on his own. He can't even, as we know from now experience, he can't even interfere when Reggie gets involved with the team. So all of the abuse he would be piling on Bjergsen, Parth would just be sitting there silent and comms, you know, being Dyrus, just getting ganked over and over and over again.
We nailed it.
if gaming and everything related to gaming was completely and irrevocably banned tomorrow, what do you think you'd end up doing for a living? I mean, I've said this before, but I probably would have gone to probably like graduate school for Western mysticism and Gnosticism. You know, just chilled out, tenure track professor, just in some campus somewhere teaching classes. That'd probably be me.
I've got a new answer for this because I've already had this similar question many times. I normally used to always say like comic book writer because it used to be my dream job and it's something. But I've got another one. If I can't do that, I'll take another one just because it'll make you think, what? But I don't give a fuck. The other thing I would do, but if I did this, Monty, the key thing is though, you have to understand you can't ever do a public job again because of the things you have to say in this job will ruin any public job. I would be a battle rapper, and I'm not joking. But here's the problem though. Spoiler, if I do it, I'm going to have to say words that'll get me banned forever a few minutes. So if I do it, there's no coming back from that one. It's a burn in the ships moment, Monty. So you can imagine, first of all, I've even got the fucking demeanor for it. Like my temperament would be amazing in that shit, of course.
On the last SI, you referenced the Whose League Is It Anyway episode where Thorin roasted Travis on his own show and ultimately led to the creation of SI. As a decade-long LoL enjoyer, are there any other nuggets from the early days of leagues that you think are must-watch / reads? I mean, I'll
give you one that's a super deep pull. It's going to be from way back in the day, but do you remember in the old CLG that was the superstar one with St. Vicious and Hotshot and Chowster and Big Fat GG and Doublelift? That lineup, if you remember, there's like a video on YouTube, you can go look it up, where they're playing a scrim, but it's their comms. And the joke is, if you don't know, they were the best team even at the time. Like they actually were a really skilled team. So the joke is they would be winning the game while just arguing like 13-year-old kids in like school, like, oh, and then you fucking come here, you fucking idiot, don't do that. As they're talking like that, by the way, they're just like winning the game on the screen. Like it's so that just shows you what all league was like, because NA was a joke for that. Like people just had no synergy, like no comms, like fucking it was outrageous, mate. That's an old school pull for you.
I think beyond like Breaking Point and Game Cribs, which are obvious and you've probably seen, I would say that some of the funniest early game League of Legends stuff was actually when they decided that it would be a fun idea to constantly record everything that happened in the curse house. So you get like Saint Vicious
when he argued elements or whatever
that he's going to replace him.
When he was drunk. Oh, no, the funniest part, people forget the punchline isn't even that you all think the joke is that he's yelling at a person and he's drunk. No, the punchline is he says, I'll bring in Locust right now. And if you don't know, you can ask Dom about this. The Locust guy is an example of someone where like it's like no one knew how bad he was till they sort of got to lands with him and like, holy shit, like this guy's actually not very good at all. Like so like Dom was essentially Saint was doing like the most toothless fucking like threat of all time. Basically his threat was just like going up to like fucking listen, I'm going to make it extreme here because let's be real. Like at this point, Elements was like a little bit washed, but Elements once upon a time was a good support, right? So this would be like going to Smeb when he's down on his luck and going, "I'll bring Long Panda through that fucking door right now. I'll get Morgan in here tomorrow." Like, who gives a shit? Why for the fuck? You know what I mean? Who gives a shit? That's not even a threat, is it, you asshole? That was an egregious one there. I know.
Yeah, it was super funny. I mean, a lot of the Saints stuff back in the day, like the Saints tots, like Saint Vicious's daycare was super funny. Here's one, and I say this, I think Saint Vicious is the nicest guy.
Oh, I love him. He's one of my favorite characters. Yeah,
he's also just like a real sweetheart. But he was hilarious back in the day. And so one of the things that you could never do now that he did was he rated like the girls in League of Legends. He made like a tier ranking of like the famous women in League of Legends, which obviously like even at the time was inappropriate, but now it's like particularly inappropriate. But the Saint Vicious, like when he would drink the box wine and like tell stories, he was very funny, guys. He was very funny.
I really hate it, Monty, when people inappropriately and without any kind of permission or consent sexualize people who compete. But enough about Big Dickler and Overly. Sorry, what? Sorry.
And what about Joe Marsh and Owner?
I know. It's mental, isn't it? I know. The fuck.
But I mean, this goes back to there were just so much funny shit happening around that time in esports, because that was also like the peak of In Control like being hilarious on State of the Game with
This
like
is when StarCraft 2 was popping. Yeah,
StarCraft 2 was I don't know, guys. StarCraft 2, I missed the shit out of that because the characters that were involved. Nani was actually in my stream the other day.
Oh, okay.
Watch. He's a big League fan now, so he popped up. But what an amazing character that guy was in StarCraft. People like Idra and Huck and In Control like Artosis. Back when JP was funny. I don't know what happened to that guy, but
he took a weird turn, didn't he? He was just a really
took
cool host.
very weird
It was basically like the Dagon of his day. He was just like the like sort of professional guy you'd pick as your host, wasn't he? He was just a good guy.
Yeah, and also, I mean, he was edgier, like a lot edgier back then. But like the early days of, not even early days, just the days of StarCraft 2, like 2008, starting in the beta through like 2012 was pretty hilarious. So all of that kind of stuff. You guys can go back and
all I'll say is I'll also never be able to see that guy in the same light. If anyone knows, I'll just say the term and you can look it up and forget about it. If anyone knows the saga of when he was like JP McBeater and all those logs came out, it was a really bad look, guys. He was simping before evil was a thing, put that way. So you can look that one up yourselves. That was a bad look. That's one of those ones where it's like, respect is gone. Respect is gone. Okay.
But yeah, the pro players in the back of the day used to be a lot spicier too. So unfortunately, social media has ruined the fun in many ways. League All-Pro voting has had a certain level of observable recency bias. This split seems to be no different with people like Crownie not being in the top 3 marksmen despite the format change. Do you agree with this? And if so, how could you fix this issue moving forward? The problem is like the players don't take it seriously, guys. Like the issue is that you have to have a smaller group of people who you know are going to be very serious about it do the voting, because the more people that you include, and the pro players, depending on team to team, just some of them tend to be very flippant or very biased, as we've seen. So
the thing I always hate when it comes to doing things like All Pro or MVP is, to me, Monty, the whole reason we invented in sports these particular awards was by definition to reward you for your individual play, not for the team result. The team result is decided by who wins the championship. That's what we do it for. So what I hate with the way they've done it now, where you count all of the split, including the playoffs, is you're just insanely biasing it just to who goes the furthest in the playoffs. So like, the reason I gave the example before of the NFL example of Barry Sanders is everyone acknowledges Barry Sanders is like contender for best ever at running back, but he never even came close to a championship. But the point is that he was that excellent that the way he got rewarded, Monty, is on the All-Pro lists. You go look at that. There's a reason he's in the Hall of Fame, that everyone knows he's a stud. If there wasn't the All-Pro, if you already went on who went to the final, you wouldn't know this guy in history. He'd be like some weird anomaly. So I hope we don't have that happen in League of Legends. I'll give everyone a very quick example. Do you remember the first split when Forgiven came into the EU LCS and he was on Copenhagen Wolves, a team that was like a borderline playoff team? Everyone knew already from the eye test, this guy is cracked. He was like the Exekick guy. But imagine if you can never be the best ADC because you're not going to win the championship. Like, that's why I just think it's against the spirit, in my opinion, of individual awards, if you bias them too much towards the whole like team angle. The only reason, in my opinion, it's even vaguely acceptable in the NBA for the MVP that your team has to be one of the top ones is because just logistically, no one can watch 80 plus games from all the contenders. So what they do is they assume, right, let's pick among the teams. Like, let's say all these 5 guys are all really good, right? This can be the determining factor. Did your team win the conference or something? I get that one. We don't need that in League. In League, we can watch all the games. That's the best part, especially in LEC. So let's just do it after the groups, which is the first 2 portions. Because at that point, look, let's be real. Almost no one in the bottom 2 teams is getting on anyways. That's not a problem. But after the first 2 groups, the 2 phases rather, everyone's played a pretty decent sample size again. I think at that point we can figure out who the All-Pro is.
That's a good point. You are given the unenviable. Oh, here's one. A quick one. Are there really sentient beings that believe transfer fees or signing bonuses paid to the players? That's not one I've heard a lot, but no, I mean, probably somebody believes that, but it's ridiculous. You are given the unenviable task of teaching Doublelift the proper use of the term strawman. What are some examples from his career/life that you used to help him understand it? Well, I would say, remember when Lena on your stream leaked the fact that you couldn't get rid of Dardoch when you should not have been part of those conversations, and she shouldn't have been doing it in the background of your stream. Remember how she then went and blamed Lenovo for the leak instead of acknowledging her own fault. And the actual issue was that she was an executive that should have firewalled herself from those conversations from you and not done it in the same room on your stream. There you go.
Here's what's so weird about that angle still is imagine someone getting caught on like a documentary series saying like a crazy slur and then going, it's not my fault. It's the bloody mic that caught me saying it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, that angle would never fly. So I'll tell you another one in the same case that I immediately thought of. When me and Monty and others brought up the very actual justifiably concerning scenario where the president of a big team has signed her boyfriend to play in that team from a rival contender, when we brought up, this seems like a conflict of interest, Reginald and TSM pivoted to, everyone's saying that Lena's just only got her job because she slept away to the top. No one credible was saying that. Go and find me a single tweet or comment from anyone famous who ever implied that even. It was never implied anywhere.
Yeah,
that's a straw man.
All the time.
They did that intentionally. Essentially,
exactly.
Reggie just beat the fuck out of that straw man and never landed a punch on us. You know?
Would you guys say that corruption / shady practices occur more often in esports or traditional sports? Oh my God. I mean, have you seen the FIFA or the International Olympic Committee? I mean, it's way worse than traditional sports, but it's still very bad in esports. We're equal. It's just a matter of scale.
Here's the thing. I don't think esports is unique. From my experience, it's why I always give you the example. I actually did a video on this topic once. It was called something like why there will always be shady or bad esports orgs. And what I basically explained is, by definition, because it is such an aspirational job to be a pro player, it is just like every other pipe dream, Monty. To be a singer in the music industry, to be an actor in Hollywood. There is essentially infinite supply of naive people who want the job, but the demand is incredibly, incredibly small. It's only a few chances. What that means by definition is you will always at the bottom of industries like that get really shady people who the whole way they are even able to do business is scamming the naive, optimistic person who wants to make it in this industry. And because that's how the bottom of the industry works, the analogy I gave in the video was this, Monty. The reason why everyone's first contract in Hollywood or the music industry is a bad, shady contract is because why would the guy himself take you on and give you a great deal? He's at the bottom of the industry. His whole angle is he's going to take you on, Monty, and be your agent because he's representing 50 people and he's only going to take the gigs for the best people. Like, he's by definition going to be scam because you haven't built your name value up. Once your name value goes up and you're Prince or fucking Leonardo DiCaprio, you don't have to go to the dodgy agent anymore. So the point is, there will always be like this because there's a billion people want to be a pro player and are willing to do anything to do it. So just that's how all these industries seem to work, in my opinion, because the actual currency of things like esports and music, as much as it's dark, is the passion of the person who starts out in the field. Like, those people are willing to do anything it takes to make it.
Yep.
So I think you'll always have problems like this, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's just high competition industries will inevitably prey on that competition. And I think the other thing is that at least the big governing bodies are easily corruptible because you have nation states that are willing to bribe the International Olympic Committee or the FIFA committee in order to get the, sports wash, basically, and the people are vulnerable to that. I mean, we know Qatar bribed a bunch of people. It was a whole scandal that got a bunch of people fired from FIFA. That's just true.
By the way, in that sense, esports is way less corrupt. Like, for example, in esports, there wasn't that many people got punished for like the Blitzchung thing. Dude, in sports, they wouldn't even say the name. That would have just been like, they would have memory hold that whole scenario and everyone would just carry on and pretend he never existed,
Besides, we don't have to have corruption when the entities like Saudi Arabia now own massive parts of esports because it's just in the open. Like, we just know what they're going to do. Like, it's not corruption. Like, that's not corruption. It's just there. It just exists. Funding has been secured for an LFN LOL team, and to bypass the clever execs at Riot HQ, you have bought an LEC slot through your shell corporation, Last Hit Nation. Who do you sign or poach to your staff, assuming anyone is available for staff? So it's like head coach, strategic coach, analyst, drafts specialist, head of scouting and development. I mean, I'd probably reunite Mac and Peter Dunn. That seemed to be a pretty good combination on Mad Lions that continues to work well. I mean, I think that there's a lot of good analysts. I mean, I think people like Rugby and CL and Case have all proved their value. I'd probably get Yamato in there to like manage player personalities. Who else would be a good shout?
By the way, one thing as well is we would do this. We would do the
Dylan
NFL
Falco,
approach.
obviously.
Like, we wouldn't just have 2 coaches. We'd do it like an NFL team and have a whole staff of people like this, as you say. Have someone for the mental, have someone to deal with players, have someone to work on the draft. I'd have them all. Yeah.
Like Dylan Falco would probably be like the head strategic coach, I would say. But yeah, I think these are all people that have done very well.
Yes.
Well, we'll do what, guys. There were so many questions this week, so I apologize if we didn't get to them, but we've already done like a lot. So, and we do have some business stuff to do
some
with
next
LFN,
week as well. It's all good.
later.
We'll
We'll do more next week. Put them in earlier if you guys want us to get around with them, because we can't answer like 50 questions on this show, unfortunately. Let's do this one. Who for you guys are the 10 greatest LPL players? And you guys have actually asked very good questions this week. These are all very interesting, so they've necessitated.
Right, here's the point. The problem with this, Monty, is this could be a 30-minute topic, so we'll do a quick version of it. So let's just do like a spitball one. So let's start with the obvious names, like Uzi.
Hold on, I linked the thread of the candidates. So LPL actually put this out here. You can look at the list, Thorin. So the list. The candidate list for LPL were U, Uzi, V, Viper, Wayward.
No, this is wrong, mate. This is in alphabetical order. They had way more than that. They had about like 100 people nominated or something like that. So
that's right.
It's almost everyone you can think of, basically. So forget that part. Let's just do our 10. So let's do the fast ones. Like Uzi I, Xiaohu. Let's see. I'll do it. So I'll keep the order. Xiaohu, Uzi I, who? Mako, Ming.
Yep.
Ming. Scout,
Knight,
Rookie, Scout. Let's see, how many have we got here? It's 3, 6, 7.
Probably Jackie Love.
Jackie Love's a bit more borderline for me, but
Wait, okay, yeah.
Let's see, that's 3, 6, 9. We've got one more. We haven't done any junglers, to be fair.
I mean, it's hard, right? I mean, I think you have to include Messiah in there.
That seems questionable. Messiah, you only played like the first year.
All right. I know you hate Clear Love, but
Clear Love can have it. He played a lot of years. There we go. We'll do Uzi I, Xiaohu, Mako.
I think Tian has to be in there for his domestic performances.
Then take Jackie Love out then.
Yeah. Okay.
There's only 10. We've got 10 already, so I'll take Jackie Love out for that one.
Tian,
basically, we did Uzi I, Xiaohu, Mako, Ming, Knight, Rookie, Scout, Tian, Wei Zhao, and Clear Love. But spoiler, this is probably the region that has the most people who are candidates for this. That's why I don't blame her for putting like 100 people. Like, I think this is the difference with this one is like I haven't even put on here like fucking. Let me see, the Shy. I mean, a whole bunch of people. Viper's not on there. There's a lot. This is you almost can't go wrong with top 10.
9, who's been very good for a long time right now. Doan B, given his pedigree within the LPL, because you also have to consider that some of these players haven't necessarily done well internationally, but they've performed extremely well domestically. So I don't know. That was a quick and dirty one. I think that's a 2-hour video, guys.
Yeah, here's the thing. I think we actually will do a video like that in the future. We'll get Dom to do it with us, because that would be the move. Because essentially,
it would be really fun to do this.
Like I already I'm seeing, there's some names we haven't got on there that easily could get on.
Flandre probably deserves to be on there to a certain degree.
The joke is Deft could be on there, mate. Yeah. You just don't think of him as an LPL player, you know what I mean? I know everyone forgot him, but he could probably be on there. So yeah, we'll do that as a bigger topic in the future. That's a good one.
Yeah, it's a really good one. It's also very challenging in LPL because players tend to rise and fall faster than they do in Korea. I think it's a much easier exercise in LCK than it is in LPL.
Yes, I agree.
LPL is very hard. That would be an interesting one. I think we'll probably call it there this week, guys.
All right.
Here's a good one. We'll end with this one. When is the league version of Hot Take Point Made coming? That is definitely something that we may be looking into.
Yes, that's more just around. We just got to get some of the finance stuff set in place, but I do want to do that. I think it's just an obvious.
It's a really good model that you made, Thorin, and I think
especially because here's why it would be cool, Monty. You could be on the League One, obviously in CS:GO, it's not your game, but like it'd just be me and you plus a guest or a third person, wouldn't it? So I think it's a slam dunk. We've got to do it at some point.
I agree. I would like to do that show, and I think that that show may be one that, especially as we move into other games beyond League and CS:GO, that, you know, I could easily see us do a Valorant version of that
Yes.
show as well, or, you know,
Yes.
It applies so nicely to other games, and the reaction to it's been very, very good. So that's definitely something we want to do. Yeah. All right, guys. Sorry we didn't get to all the questions. There were just quite a few this week. We normally get to them all, but in the interest of time, we got to go work on some of this business stuff that we have cooking right now, so that we can actually continue the company. I suppose there is one. The last question this week at the very, very bottom what would be the worst case for LFN in case you can't get funding? Well, we just can't continue the company.
It'll just end as a company. It'll be it.
Yep. I mean, that's it. You know, we have to have everybody making a living from this. And so, yeah, it would be extremely unfortunate, but that would be the end result. But that doesn't look like the result we have, is what I will say. Things are trending very positively at the moment. So I don't think that's going to happen, but you never know. All right, guys. So thank you very much for watching. It'll be Best Damn League show happening tomorrow, and we'll be back with more SI next week.
Not freeze pipe.